working. Happy Easter, everyone. Hope everyone had a good social isolation with their families. I Facebook chatted with my 99-year-old grandmother, which was a nice treat. But that's pretty much all I did. So this is going to be some thoughts that I've had recently. So many of you know I started a subreddit last fall dedicated to my interest in communal showers. So I did that largely out of frustration because there was no formal study of the subject and there were so few people talking about it in a way that I liked. Certainly there was a lot of kink porn out there, that sort of stuff. That isn't really what I was interested in. None of that stuff was analytical or historical, and I wouldn't deny that I had some fetishes about it, but my interest goes way, way, way beyond that, and that kind of stuff. I'm just not into porn generally. So I started a subreddit, and the entire purpose of that subreddit was to act as a well or a forum to accumulate information and like-minded people, expertise, people who knew what they were talking about, people who could have an interesting discussion about it and who could add stuff, right? Who could add that people could go and find things that I wasn't going to be able to find or whatever and contribute. And in that, it's been, somewhat successful. Could it have been more successful? Sure. But so far, I've learned a lot of stuff that I didn't know before. And if you are curious, I'm actually going to put a link to this subreddit in the description here. That's what I'm doing at the moment. But there's been some interesting things that I've learned since I started it. So one of them, one of the common things that now happens quite regularly is that I will, I'll get messages. People will send me private messages, so they won't post in the site. They won't post on YouTube or anything, but they'll private message me on Reddit. And they'll say something along the lines of they're very into communal showers. They were very important to their life. They like them for whatever reason. They'll go into them that they were transformative, that they got over phobias, that they bonded with their friends, with their classmates, that they were good for their body image, yada, yada, yada. That for everything that I can tell, they're every bit as into them, interested in them, as I am, and that they think that they're beneficial socially generally, like that they would think that the vast majority of people would benefit from exposure to them and experiencing them. And so then I'll say, okay, and a lot of these guys have, and they're not always guys, there's actually a couple girls who've done it as well, will come and I'll say, well, okay, those are all interesting experiences. Why don't you post about it in the subreddit? I mean, we have a community there of people who have similar experiences to a large extent. I mean, many of them have more experience than I do. I have actually fairly limited experience in it, right? I wasn't on any sports teams I didn't do it in gym class. I wasn't in the military, wasn't on a swim team, I had a fairly narrow experience compared to many people. And every time I've asked this, these people who, love communal showers and feel compelled, all of them went looking for them. Here, I'm going to post it in the site actually. And they felt compelled to talk about it, what they wanted to reach out to me. They want to talk to me. They're very, hey, let's talk about this. I want to know. And then when I say, okay, why don't you share your experience? They'll say, no, I don't want it to be public. I don't want anyone to know that I think these things, even though the things they're thinking are not illegal. They're not criminal. They're not pedophilic. They're not pornographic, typically. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Then again, people fetishize everything, so I don't know why that's necessarily a bad thing in this case. But they think that it's going to, carry this high social cost, which, I'm out there. I have videos out there. This is not a secret. And so far, I've incurred zero social cost to this. That's not to say it could never happen, but I don't know anyone who's going to be out there more than me. And so far, nada in terms of a cost. But what all these people understand that communal showers are declining, right? That they're on a trajectory of disappearing at a certain rate. And they disagree with that. They're uncomfortable with that. They think that this is something to be lamented and to be uh, that it's a bad thing, and yet they won't even discuss it openly with other like-minded people. So I'm not talking about like a public Facebook post or a public YouTube channel, or at a speech at your family member's wedding or anything like that. They won't do it. And even when I say, well, you can make a throwaway account, and there's people who have done that, and they still won't do it. And the first couple times, this was just getting increasingly aggravating, right? You have people who will not. They have these beliefs. They have something of a cause, and I'm not saying, look, no one's obligated to launch a social crusade, right? Nobody's obligated to become an activist, not for libertarianism, not for circumcision, not for anything, right? It's your life. But the critique is, if you have something that you really care about, that you think is this valuable thing that you don't want to see disappear, but you are not willing to do anything, not even the smallest infinitesimal microscopic contribution that could plausibly do anything to avert that end result, then what are we talking about? And I'm reminded of the quote that I'm going to misquote, and is probably in its most common iterations a misquote. That when good men do nothing, that's all it takes for evil to win, or whatever. This is Edmund Burke said something along those lines. I know I'm butchering that. I'm sorry. And I remember the first time that I became outspoken um, politically, which was in college, and it was, I'd already become an anarcho-capitalist, but I never talked about it. I never debated anybody about. Well, we'd have discussions at like the cafeteria table, but they were never that heated, and it wasn't that public. And I remember that one of my college professors in one of our classes, and this was a class about music education, so not a politically charged topic really, who would make asides, take these little moments to um, say stuff like affirmative action was good, that gun control was good, and launch into these little mini lectures about his political ideology that really had nothing to do. I mean, not even pretextually with the subject matter of the class. And at one point in class, and I think it was on affirmative action, I just raised my hand. I was like, "Hold up, I think that's wrong. Here's why." And he said, "Well, I'm not here to debate this." And I was like, "Well, you brought it up in class, so are we just supposed to sit here and listen to you preach to us about your political ideology, and we have to sit here and pretend like we didn't hear it?" And I remember after the class, a number of people came up to me and thanked me. They said, "I'm glad you said that. I wanted to say something and I didn't." And I can understand why people wouldn't. I mean, you're in a class. Sorry, my voice broke. It's the coronavirus again. I can understand why you're worried that a professor is going to maybe give you a bad grade, and they have all this authority over your future and whatever. And for those of you curious who know my history a little bit, this is the same professor who, not long after this, told me that if I wanted to be a public school teacher, I would have to teach whatever the public school curriculum said as the truth, whether I believed it was true or not. I mean, he actually put it in those terms. That if I thought that what the public schools were teaching was a lie, I would have to teach it as if it was true. When I said I was not willing to do that, he said that I could not be a qualified public school teacher if that was my stance. And knowing that, he would never allow me to graduate from Michigan State University with an education degree, because in his mind, I couldn't be a public school teacher if I was not willing to teach what I perceived to be falsehoods as truth. So, but the thing is that that quote just kept sticking in my head. If you just sit there and you don't say anything, nothing's going to change. And so I have this now recurrent thing, and granted, communal showers, it's not the war in Yemen, it's not the IRS, it's not the income tax, it's not the police state, it's not the Patriot Act, it's not the war on drugs, it's not gun control, right? I'm not saying, I'm not implying that my priorities are such that I see this as the linchpin top issue, but it's emblematic of a broader social ill when people, I mean, there's nothing, it's not illegal, it's, there's so many arguments you can make that are perfectly valid. And the thing is, the arguments against communal showers are very vapid and very weak. They're not very good arguments. But if, sorry, but if they go unrefuted because the proponents say nothing, because they're afraid for whatever reason, then they're going to decline into nothing. Okay, so there's many, many people out there who think that they're valuable for whatever reason. Now, I don't know how many. I'm not going to say it's a majority. It may not be. In fact, it's probably not. There was probably a point when it was. That point's probably passed, but there's a lot of people out there who value them for all kinds of reasons. Body image reasons, socializing reasons, character building reasons, hygienic reasons, sports reasons, just body positivity. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of reasons, and the counter reasons are not very good. But if you don't say anything, then you're going to lose the debate. If you and not just because you're not advancing the argument, because then but you're also giving the impression that there is no contrary point of view, and that these things must be so bad because nobody will even defend them. Uh, so, again and again, I'm making this video out of frustration because it just happened again tonight. I had somebody who reaches out to me today. They're really gung-ho about the topic. They want to talk about it. They have all these experiences. And I'm not asking them to write to their senator. I'm not asking them to upload a YouTube video. I'm just asking them to share their experiences with other people so we can have a forum where there's a dialogue with people who have these experiences that are platonic, that are legal, that are non-pornographic, not even like some of these guys they insist are straight. So it's not even that. Now, some of them are gay, obviously, but and even though they have this strong urge and they've gone to the trouble to search it on the internet and then reach out to the first guy that they can find who is out there talking about it publicly. And then, yeah, right on. I agree. Okay, will you post about it? Like, I'm talking like, hey, I was on a high school wrestling team. We showered as a team. It was enjoyable. Some of the guys were nervous. They got over it. We had to do it to stay clean, but it was also good for team building. I do it now that I'm in college, and it's fun. I get to know my classmates better, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Nothing. I'm worried that someone's going to find out. Find out what? Find out what? And the thing is, by being silent, the thing that you claim to value so much, it's going to go away. I mean, the best you could say is that by being completely silent and not contributing to the social dialogue at all, that you're just surrendering that, allowing it to go whatever way, and then you have no control over it. So, random, it could go one way or the other. Okay. But it's even worse than that in the case of many of these issues, because many of these issues, they have a trajectory. Communal showers have been declining. The first video I ever made on the topic, the curious decline of communal showers, and they continue to decline. And there's no reason to assume that they won't continue to do that unless there's some kind of pushback, unless there's some kind of articulated reason why that shouldn't happen. And if nobody articulates that, or if only one person articulates that, it's just not going to do very well. And yet, again and again and again, I will expect that this will happen day in, day out. At this point, it's happening once or twice a week. These conversations are happening. It's growing in frequency as time goes on, as more people find the subreddit. And it's not fair to them that I'm getting more and more frustrated because, this is just their first time and they don't realize that I've now had this a mirror of this conversation for 6 months now. But this goes, I'm talking about communal showers, but this could be any topic. Anything that where you have a belief or you have a value system that is not already in the ascendant, that isn't already the hegemonic belief. If you're silent about it, it's not going to change. Now, and the smaller it is, the more marginal importance there is on your voice. Now, if say abortion is a really important issue, and I'm vocal about abortion, as any of you know, but you could make the argument there's lots of people who are pro-life. They have many proponents. They have many voices, and so if you don't lend your voice to that, and I don't think you have an obligation to that. Some people think that they do, and there's an argument there, but I'm going to say that you don't. And and in terms of utilitarian arguments, it's good. It probably doesn't matter that much because you're not contributing that much. Unless you're going to be really good at it or you persuade someone who's going to change their mind. But when you have more marginal beliefs, if you have ideas that fewer people are aware of or that carry a higher stigma, then this is different. So I see this with the intactivist debate. There are a lot of intactivists there, but foreskin is still stigmatized. And I think that every voice we can add to that chorus of intactivism is really important. Okay. And so there it is. And I think the communal showers is the most. There is no communal shower movement. There's been quiet mumbling, quiet whispering. As far as I can tell, there's nothing. And so that was another reason why I started the subreddit and why I made the videos, because it didn't exist anywhere else. So I thought that was a quote from Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I think Tolkien was borrowing from Burke, as he often did. Would the teacher himself have been willing to teach the evils of public schools if the curriculum got changed? So he would have said yes. That's assuming that he's not a hypocrite. And the truth is that he probably would wiggle out of that question by assuming that he would always be able to, that the curriculum would always be what he wanted it to be. This was a guy, he had a will to power. He hated private schools and he hated homeschooling. Like, he hated them. He said that explicitly to my face. And when I said, but academically, the evidence is that they're better than public schools, that they, not only do kids do better academically, they do it on a smaller budget, and they help the public schools by reducing the student load in those schools. So and their parents still pay for public schools. So what is the problem? And the problem was that they, by being independent to an extent, could escape statewide or federal mandates on curriculum. And he wanted to have that control. He wanted to control what children are taught. And if you go to him and say, I don't want my kid to be taught by your curriculum, he saw that as an affront. Now, he was delusional in the sense that he thought that the government curriculums is going to be the curriculum that he wants. Now, as a state agent with a lot of respect in state agencies, he probably had some influence over state curriculum, but it wasn't complete. And so this is a very classic case where people project what they want to believe onto what the government's doing, and they defend the government based on their projections and not on the reality. I made a video a long time ago called "Government: The Chalice of Desire," where that's one of the greatest strengths of the state, is because people are rationally ignorant to what it's actually doing and how it actually works. And then they just see that it's this mighty force for social change, which it is a mighty force in a lot of ways. And then they imagine that force is being wielded by them, that they're the dictator controlling the government, and it's implementing policy exactly how they want. And that's never true. And not only is that never true, that's just hypothetically impossible. But he would have thought that he could have controlled a curriculum and that there would be no variance between what it demanded he teach and what he believed. And so if he was actually confronted with that in real life, my guess is that he would be a hypocrite. But he would rationalize it along those lines. That's my guess, but we'll never know, because this guy, I think he was also status hungry. And so I don't see him ever going down to public schools again, because he was already in academia and had been for, by the time I met him, about a decade. Are you against cubicles because they are not communal? No, because you're not naked in those situations, so cubicles are fine. And the noise and all that, they make sense. It makes sense to have a barrier then. Um, my wife makes me promise no crazed anarchist rants before I get dragged to dinner parties. Well, again, nobody's obligated at all. So the argument here isn't you owe it to society to do this. It's more you owe it to yourself. If these are things that you believe, it's just like somebody who bitches how they're not in shape and how they're not healthy and how they're fat. And then you say, well, maybe you should go to the gym and go on a diet. And they're like, yeah, no, I'm never going to do that. Then what the fuck are you bitching about? Why are you bitching? If you're not going to do anything about it, just shut the fuck up. Okay. And so it's that's what you should do if you want to lose weight and get in shape and become strong, or if you want to become a good, if you want to become a good marksman. I don't know anything about guns, but I wish I did. Fuck, dude, buy a gun and learn how to be good at it. These are all things you can do. And if you think that communal showers are valuable and that they're good, and like the people who are reaching out to me, they are in that camp, and then you say, okay, well, they're on the decline, and the main reason is that there is no counter argument is offered, even though the counter arguments are really quite good. Then maybe what you should do is contribute to that. And to your wife's point, that doesn't mean all the time. I don't bring it up all the time. I don't interject that into every conversation I always have. You have to make rational calculations about when is this more or less effective. But if you never do anything, if you never have a rant under any circumstances with anybody, then that's completely pointless. Okay, so there's a false dichotomy. It's a funny joke, Luke, and whatever, but like there's a huge gap between always doing it, always being preachy, right? That becomes counterproductive and a waste of time at a certain point. And actually, at a pretty early point, you don't have to do too much of it before you're not being contributing, or doing nothing. So if you're getting dragged to a party, you should be able to rent it. I like your subreddit, but have to say I'm sorry you guys never experienced communal showers as the default before it became exoticized. So I don't I I'd be interested to see when you experienced them to say that, because I don't know, when I was growing up they weren't exoticized in the popular consciousness yet. Like I said in that video, it was my expectation growing up that they were a mundane, normal part of growing up. That once you got to middle school, everybody did it, and you would expect to do it all through middle school, high school, and college. And then in many, many avenues after that: gyms, pools, military, camps, camping, whatever. And it was, now when I got there, when I got to middle school, they had ended, and they probably had just ended. Like I said, it was still in the syllabus. And I granted, public school teachers are not always the best about keeping the syllabus up to date. I had syllabuses in 2005 that talked about the Soviet Union and its future, like what's the future of the Soviet Union hold, and this is 12 years after it collapsed, but that was in college. So I don't know how long they lasted, but my guess is that it was within a year or two. So it's true that in my personal experience, they were somewhat exotic. Again, I got exposed, like most the the middle school and high school I went to. That's what they had. The facilities, that's what they were. And my high school, interestingly, it was built in um, the high school that I went to was built in 1999, which is well into, the decline had already happened by then. But the architects at that time apparently were still on the old system because they built communal showers there. I'm kind of curious if that's what they still have. Um, but it was normalized and had just stopped being normal, but it wasn't like there was a big announcement. There was no, hey, attention world, this is now a weird thing that most people don't do. So I don't know how much I see it as exotic, because my initial interest was, why did this go from something everybody did to something that's really quite mundane? But I hear your point. Um, I think the people who fetishize it are fetishizing it because they don't do it. If you go to Iceland, for instance, there's gay men in Iceland. They don't fetishize communal showers ever. They don't even, and they don't go to that. Like, they could, if you're in Iceland, you can see thousands and thousands of naked men every day if you want. And they don't, because they've seen thousands and thousands of naked men since they were little kids, and it's just completely mundane to them. Like, completely mundane. So I think that that's true. So again, if this is something that you're interested in and you won't even engage in dialogue about it, then you're just surrendering to it's having it go whichever way everyone else is talking about. Um, yeah, and the city swimming pool in Reykjavik, have been there. Well, which one? There's like 35 in Reykjavik. My favorite is Laugus das Laug and Vestibule. I've grown up experiencing communal showers, and now I'm afraid of getting an erection when going into one. Yeah, so I'll answer that in a second. One of the other fascinating things is several of the guys who have reached out to me identify themselves as alpha males. I'm an alpha male. I'm confident. I'm a jock, blah, blah, blah. Here's all the reasons I love communal showering. And then I'm like, okay, will you talk about it? And they're like, no, I'm worried that I'll get in trouble or whatever. I'm like, okay, alpha male, you're really a fucking stud. You won't say one word to defend something that you say is but so more off my chest there. But um, fear of getting an erection is a very, very common fear. It is not one that's very likely. I have, at this point, I have been doing it for years, and I have seen people get erections, but it's been like two or three ever. And actually, they were all in Iceland, and they were all uncircumcised, for what that's worth. Um, and I don't see them. And part of that is, I have talked to people who said that they did have that happen when they were young. So like 8, 9, 10, apparently that's more likely to happen. I think you just have less control. Um, the other thing is, as you do it, it really does become mundane, and it does not become erotic. So I think that unless you're 8 or 9 or 10, I don't think that you should worry about it. Um, and the other thing is, even if it does happen, which I must stress is very unlikely. I'm gay. It doesn't happen to me. I've done it with other gay guys. It didn't happen to them. I've seen other gay guys. It didn't happen to them. I've seen straight guys. It doesn't happen to them. I've seen younger guys. It doesn't happen to them. Can it happen? Yes. Is it very likely? No. And the other thing is, as you go, it becomes correspondingly less likely, just because it becomes more mundane and more routine and less eroticized. And that's the other thing. If you're straight, I mean, it's naked dudes, so you shouldn't find that at least directly erotic. We can get into lots of semantic debates about that, but you shouldn't find that directly erotic. The other thing is, depending where you go, you're probably mostly going to be talking about older men. So unless you're attracted to older men specifically, not unlikely. Now, if you're attracted to younger guys, like the mid 20s and younger, let me know if you find a gym where there's tons of guys like that showering in the communal showers, because I want to go visit it. But like that's not very common. So are older men going to get you aroused? Probably not. And in the very unlikely chance that you are, no one's going to say anything. Just face the wall. Okay, I have had this problem when I've hooked up. I have hooked up with people before. Never at my own gym. So if my own gym people watch this, I don't shit I don't shit in my backyard. Never at my gym I go to, but at other gyms when I'm traveling. And you mess around with somebody, and when you hear company coming, you just face the wall, and they can't see. They can't see. They don't know. It's plausible deniability. So again, it's not a big deal, and no one's going to say anything. No one's going to point. That's something that happens in high school. If you're past high school, that's not going to happen. So I think that I understand why people are worried about that. It seems like a very plausible fear to have, but it's not a justified one. It's very unlikely to happen, and the consequences, if it does happen, aren't they're negligible. I mean, if you're talking about you're at a gym with strangers, I'm going to call your mom. It's not going to happen. I'm 2 weeks into restoring. Skin seems stretchier, but seems like it will be a journey. Congratulations, and yes, it will be a journey. It'll take a long time, but some people can do it in a year. Some people will take 7-10 years. So just find something that's comfortable and do it every day. Make it a routine. Interestingly, the decline of communal showers probably helped lessen being made fun of for having a foreskin. I didn't communal shower and never understood foreskin until I learned about it about circumcision. Well, so obviously that's a conjunction of two things that I find really interesting, and it's hard for my brain to not want to make some kind of correlation there. And there may be, but I feel like I would have to be straining and forcing to make that happen. Um, there are intactivists who do think that circumcision has something to do with body shame and insecurity. And they're right, it does. Like there is something about it. How widespread is it and how exactly does it affect people? I don't know. There is something to the idea that you're supposed to have a foreskin, and it feels better in some psychological sense to be covered. And so but the problem is the correlation is really terrible, because we have circumcision rates passing 50% by 1920 and passing like 80 or 90% by 1950. And those people born in that period were going through the heyday of communal shower. If you were born in 1950, you finished high school before 1970. And so that's completely within the heyday of communal showering. So even accounting for the generational gap and all that. Now, so if being intact in a majority cut society was a problem, it just doesn't line up. And the thing is, the decline in communal showering is correlating with the decline in circumcision, but again with a big gap. And so one of the interesting things, I mean, the most salient point where they intersect is actually people who are pro-circumcision will list as an argument for circumcising their son. One of the very common ones is, I'm worried that they will get made fun of in the locker room. And that is preposterous for two reasons. The main reason is very few kids are getting naked in locker rooms right now. And if you have a kid right now, if current trends continue, there probably are even less likely, right? So the people who are in high school at this moment, most of them are not being seen naked by their peers ever, or it's very rare. Some are, not many. Somebody who's born right now, if current trends continue, and I hope that they don't continue, but if they do, they'll be even less likely. The other thing is, when they do, the evidence that you get made fun of for being uncircumcised is very limited. They actually have done surveys of this, and the number one reason is penis size, and I think there's like one or two others, and foreskin is way down the list. And then the other problem now is that because circumcision rates have dropped enough that you are not going to be the only guy that anyone's ever seen who's got a foreskin. In some parts of the country, it's already true. It's a majority, right? So if you're going to a swim meet in California or in Washington State or in Oregon, and you're a 15-year-old in high school, or in Maine or in Vermont, uh, it's going to, or in most urban centers in Florida and Texas, there's going to be a lot of foreskin, even a majority of foreskin. I have a friend who was on a football team in Bangor, Maine, and he said 2/3 of the football team was intact. So, that argument doesn't hold. But then on the other hand, I do know uncut guys who do see, they think there's a correlation too, and they think that there's that when they see other uncut guys in the showers, that they're connected and by some sense, some shared experience. And one guy's very open about he winks and he's like, oh. But no, I don't think. I would love to think that they're related just because I think the two topics are interested. I just can't really square it. Now, maybe if you did a really careful analysis of circumcision rates and communal showering rates, we might find a correlation. But the thing is, we don't have very precise data on either. We have very little data on circumcision rates. The data we have on circumcision rates is very poor. And the data we have on communal shower rates is even more poor. Like we have only the very most broad outlines on that. So we could not establish a correlation at all, I don't think, at this point. And I'm not sure if we ever will. I don't know if we will ever be able to establish what percentage of school students in 1980, 81, 82, 83, 84, were taking communal showers or not, let alone how many of them had foreskins. I imagine communal showers are still popular in boarding schools. To my knowledge, that is true. Now, at a boarding school, it's a different situation because they live there. If you have a boarding school where the kids are living there, they have to shower at school. And it also is logistically more simple. Because the number one thing at high schools is they'll say, yeah, I'm not going to shower after gym class because I'll just shower when I get home, even if you have gym class second or third period and you're going to go through the rest of the day. So, and logistically, they're not going to have like everyone an individual bathroom. Now, when I've talked to, I know guys who went to boarding schools, and that's what they say is that the sports teams, the gyms, it's communal. The dorms, it's either communal or they have stalls. One guy who went to St. Paul School, which is one of the most elite, said that they did have stalls with curtains, but it was considered a faux pas to use the curtain. And so everybody would just shower with the curtain open. And that's, a lot of that is tradition. And there may also be ideological reasons for that go unexpressed. And I wish that they would go expressed so that other people would hear them. That's my speculation. I thought foreskin was literally skin over the tip, like skin over the urethra. Yeah, like a penis hymen. The way it's described as a flap, or quote extra skin, like people really don't understand in their minds what it is. And the first time I saw one, it wasn't. The references that I had heard did not give me any kind of mental picture of what to expect. And there are actually a lot of cut guys who have, it's almost like a traumatic experience where they see an uncut guy at some point early in their life, and when they realize that they're the ones who have something missing, it's really traumatic for some people. Thanks for the perspective, Alpha Mike. Yeah, so I would, Alpha Mike, just relax. If you can find a place with a communal shower, just go. If you can go with friends, I always encourage that. Like if you have like workout buddies or classmates or whatever, just go with that and just realize it's not a big risk. It doesn't happen to most people. It's very rare. If it does happen, again, you might feel a little embarrassed, but very few people are going to notice. And the more you go, the less it's going to happen. And so I'm speaking as a gay man. It's never happened to me. I've gone to the gym with other gay men. I've never seen it happen to them. I've seen hundreds or thousands of guys now at this point, and I've seen it happen once or twice. So it's not a big fear. You jacking it in the gym showers with trade? Who's trade? I agree about the importance of speaking up. I always break my promise and still engage in said crazy anarchist rant. Yeah, again, there's a argument to say, hey, in this circumstance, it may not do anything. There's also, even if you don't persuade them, it might still be worth doing if it's cathartic for you or if it helps you sharpen your argument or whatever. That's fine. Um, you may not persuade them, but there might be an audience. But on the other hand, there's also times where it's just not going to do any good at all. Like if you're confident in your abilities to make the argument and you know nobody's there is going to be swayed, it doesn't make a huge difference. Sometimes it's good just to let them know, like, hey, not everybody agrees with you, so don't act like this is something that everyone just accepts. Um, so if someone's like, hey, everyone knows we all want Medicaid for all. No, not everyone, quote, knows that. But again, you don't want to be that preachy person that makes you lose credibility in the long run. But you should, to say nothing ever, then you might as well not have the beliefs. Men your age don't get aroused. Not in the in the in the locker rooms. I I mean the two that I saw, I don't know how old they were. They didn't seem particularly younger than me, so they might have been my age. They might have been younger. I don't know. They could have been older. It's just not very common. And again, I've seen a lot of younger guys too, and I've never seen it happen. Granted, most of them were probably not gay, but some of them probably were too. And it doesn't seem like that big of a threat. If you've never, here's the other thing. If you're really nervous about something, if you have a lot of anxiety about a new experience, let's say you've never communal showered and you're really worried about it, that anxiety is more likely to kill a boner than give you a boner. And then as you go through it, that anxiety will diminish, but at the same time, directly inversely related to that, it will become more mundane, and so it will not get you as nervous. So again, I can't say that it's impossible that it could never happen, but it's very unlikely. And if it does happen, the consequences will be minimal. I mean, they really were. No one's going to say anything. No one's going to call the cops. They're not going to talk to the front desk. Especially if you're not doing, like if you're going and you're trying to hook up with somebody and, oh, I got a boner. Yeah, that's different. But if you're just minding your own business and it happens, nobody's going to say anything. If I recall, the New York sports club chain had communal showers. So I've only been to one gym in New York City, and it was Equinox, not New York Sports Club, and they had stalls with completely clear doors, so you could see everything but not have it be communal. I think that it was just to prevent orgies from happening, but I don't know for sure. There is a place called Boston Sports Club, which might be affiliated with New York Sports Club, and I've heard that they do as well, but I've never gone. What portion of society do you suppose communal showering would affect? It's difficult to see this as relevant for people who aren't on sports teams or part of a gym. Well, that certainly does depend. I think that they are relevant in uh, any kind of pool, campground, gym, certain types of school. And of course, I'm not for public schools, but this could happen at boarding schools or private schools. Any kind of sports team. Uh, Again, if we're talking anarchy, I don't know about a military, but like militaries have them. Um, I think that's an interesting point. Um, but what percentage of society is going to be engaged in those things? I don't think we can predict. Um, like logistically speaking, it's the most efficient way to handle a lot of people. And so, any situation where you have a lot of people using facilities, you need to be and if you read into the history of pools, this is kind of a parallel thing. The hygienic reasons to insist that people shower both before, well, especially before they use a pool and to a lesser extent after, are pretty strong. Uh, and it's actually quite disgusting that uh, we are no longer enforcing those rules because they are actually detrimental to our health. Um, I'm in the Boston area, never seen a communal shower in my life. That's ironic because the first public school to have a communal shower was in at Boston. What is it? Boston Latin, I believe. So Boston's first school, the first school in America in 1900. Um, they do have them at Harvard. They have them at Tufts. They have them at Boston University. They have them at Boston College. And I'm just mentioning the ones that I've been in. So, um, so they do have them there. But and I've heard that they have them at Boston Sports Club, but I have not seen them myself. What portion? So to answer that question, what portion? That depends on the type of society that we have. But I think that most people would be exposed to them at some point in their life cycle. And if I had my druthers, I think I place a high value on that kind of socializing. So saunas, steam rooms, hot tubs, pools. Having been to Iceland, I thought that that was a really nice part of their culture. I'm also into like nude beaches, that sort of thing. I'm into swimming and I'm into gyms. And I think that people are, again, they shouldn't be obligatory and people's lives are their lives and they can make the choice what they want. But I think it aligns with most people's self-perception of what would be good for them to do those things. And communal showers would be a big part of those things. Now, the schools, that's different. In my conception, like if we had a free market anarcho-capitalist society, institutional schools would be, I think, have a much less of an influence. I think they would still exist. You would have some private schools and some boarding schools, and some charity-operated schools, but I think most people would be educated at home or through their parents, through tutors and stuff. That there might be like youth leagues, like kids would still want to play sports, I'm guessing, or be in Boy Scouts or whatever, and some of those would likely incorporate, they'd use facilities that had communal showers for whatever reason, but I don't think that schools would be as popular because they're a very wasteful way to do it. You don't need them for education. So I don't think people would spend that much money just to subsidize schools. So I think that that aspect of it would be a lot less, but the other aspects, I think, if anything, would be more. Also, like, when we don't have Social Security and you don't have Medicaid or Medicare, you have to be more self-conscious about your own health and your own social networking, right? You have to take care of your own body, and you have to, not just your own body, but the people who are going to take care of you. So your family, your friends, your coworkers, you're going to need to have stronger social bonds because Uncle Sam is not promising to take care of you no matter what, which is what we have now. Now, even today, you're really a fool if you're hoping that Uncle Sam's going to take care of you, because even if the check clears, that's not a life. To just be socially isolated and you get a welfare check, that's no way to live. And it's much better to have strong relationships with your family, with your friends, with your coworkers, churches, whatever. And one way to really facilitate that is with things like communal showers at the pool, at the gym, at the camp, sports teams, whatever. Yeah, it is interesting because public schools have been a bastion of communal showers, but that's not necessarily the case. And I certainly would not argue that we should keep public schools just for the purpose of maintaining, a wide participation in communal showers, which they're not even doing at this point anyway. But even if they were, I wouldn't advocate them. What got you interested in discussing communal showers? Well, if you watch, it's in the initial video, The Curious Decline of Communal Showers. But my initial interest was, I thought it was interesting that this cultural phenomenon that was brought up believing would be a ubiquitous rite of passage that everybody went through, right? In every television show, every time I talked to older people, adults, older kids, seeing the facilities with my own eyes, it was understood that communal showering would begin once I got to middle school and continue all the way through high school and college. And when I got to middle school, and I was terrified, that absolutely terrified me. When I got to middle school and it wasn't there, firstly, I was super relieved. I was like, thank God I don't have to communal shower. I was about to have a heart attack. Like, this was right after the Soviet Union had fallen. So I wasn't worried about nuclear holocaust, but I was worried about getting naked in front of my classmates. But I was interested too, because I was like, wait a second, this was something that was led to believe was a ubiquitous part of our culture. It's in the syllabus. The showers are right there. I mean, we would go and change, but we'd only change down to our underwear. We'd never get naked. We'd never wash off. Nobody even used the sinks to clean off a little bit. And so that was interesting. And then it was probably 2 years after that where I actually did take a communal shower in my Boy Scout troop. And then that was even more interesting because I went from I was totally afraid, I was terrified, and I wanted to avoid them at all costs. I did it one time, and I had a complete 180-degree experience to this was enormously positive. I felt like I was bonding with my friends who were already good friends, but it became that much more intimate and close in a non-sexual way. This was totally platonic. And it was hygienic. I was clean, and then I was like, wow, I have completely changed my orientation on this, not overnight, in the course of like 30 seconds. And to me, that was really, really interesting and enjoyable. So I wanted to do them more. And then I saw that same thing happen with other people. So other people who didn't want to do it, who resisted, who avoided it, and they would do it one time and same thing, become like converts. And that led me to think that, hey, this wasn't just me anecdotally. This is, well, more anecdotal evidence, but it seems to be like a common thing. So those two realizations, so one happened in sixth grade and one happened in about eighth grade, really made it very interesting. Now, I didn't have the internet back then. I didn't have any way. I didn't know how to talk about it. So I wasn't going around asking people, let's have a discussion. But when I got older, when I got to college, that's when I started looking into it more. Very interesting. I didn't go to a college, so I wouldn't know, obviously, but I've never seen any in the several gyms that I've been to a member of. So yeah, well, I haven't been to any gyms in Boston, so I can't say, but most of the colleges have them. Tufts has them, Boston University has them, Harvard has them, Boston College has them, and most of those gyms you can go to if you pay. Sometimes you need a student to get you in, and sometimes you don't. Some of those places I needed to go in with a friend who was a student, and sometimes I was able just to go in and pay. Um, the one I haven't gone to that sounds like it's the best is Tufts, and the one at Boston College is nice, and the one at Boston University is also nice. And the one it's not in Boston, but the one at Darth. I have been to the one at Dartmouth, and that's very nice. The one in Dartmouth is a really nice facility. If you go to the subreddit, which I put a link to in the description, I actually have a video of the one in Dartmouth, and it's really nice. Do you oppose? Are you opposed to dividers between urinals? So I don't. Yeah, a lot of people ask this. So no, I'm not opposed to there not being dividers either. The interesting thing in the study about communal showers, which I've talked about before, they had complete stalls, complete communal, and then they had divider showers. So like up to your chest. So you would probably still see people naked, but it wasn't quite as open. And it was interesting because in terms of people's responses on how they rated the shower experience and how they, was it social? Did people get along better? Did the shower enhance the community of whatever? The 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 dividers and the full stalls were clustered in one side, and then the communal were an outlier basically. Now with urinals, you're not getting naked, presumably, and you don't want there to be. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't want someone's shake off to hit me. So like, I think there might be decent sanitary reasons to have them at urinals. Similarly, people have said this about like having toilets that don't have covers. And I've experienced those at like summer camp and stuff, and I don't feel as strongly that that's necessary. So I'll be open to that argument. I'm not going to say we can't go there, but I don't think it has the same, relevance, but it could. I know you're just being funny, but like maybe. Do you go to Europe a lot for the nude beaches? I've only been to Europe twice, and I've never been to a nude beach there. So do you think COVID-19 will guarantee a win for Biden? No, I don't think it will. Because if anything, Trump has become more popular now than he's ever been before. The other thing is that likely COVID-19 is going to start to get better at some point before the election, whether it's next month or in 4 months or 5 months. So he'll be on the upswing. People don't like to change horses halfway through a crisis. And, you and I can find all kinds of faults with Donald Trump, but the evidence is pretty strong that he didn't handle it any worse than Biden did. And he might have handled it better because Biden didn't want to close the airports with China because it's racist. The other thing is Biden has dementia, and everyone knows it. And who wants that guy to be in charge? And the other thing is, I think it might have saved Trump because I do think that we were due for a correction in our economy, and there were lots of problems with the economy anyway. So we were due for a crash at some point, and if that had just happened without coronavirus, Trump would have taken that because Trump's owned this. When Obama was president, Trump was saying this economy's fake. It's just the Fed with the low money. He was talking like an Austrian. They just have low interest rates. It's a phony recovery, blah, blah, blah. And then as soon as he became president, he completely changed his mind. And I don't know if he changed his mind, but he changed his rhetoric. So if he'd been elected and he was Ron Paul and he'd been saying, hey, we still have major problems. We need to cut down spending and cut down the debt, and we need to blah, blah, blah. And had there been a recession then, he could have said, look, this is what I've been saying was going to happen. So Trump was really setting himself up for an economic collapse. But because COVID-19 happened, he can just say, look, yes, there was an economic collapse, but it's COVID-19's fault, and that's not my fault. Because COVID-19 is not Trump's fault. He can plausibly argue that it's not his fault, and it's not. So an economic collapse that he's contributed to, which again, it's not entirely his fault, but like he's contributed to it, is not going to be blamed on Corona-19. So I actually think that it's helping Trump immensely. Yeah, during PE class, we had communal showers, and that was in Canada. Were those mandatory or just encouraged? Thoughts on unisex co-ed communal showers? So I think that they're probably fine, but they should be contextual. And so this is where I think the whole idea of public policy that applies to everybody is stupid. It's the same thing I feel about trans bathrooms. Like there are many situations where I think it's fine for trans people of whatever female to male or male to female, if that facility says it's okay. And then I can also imagine scenarios where they say, you know what, we don't want the male to female 35-year-old man in with the little girls, So I think that the idea that there should be a single policy governing everyone is just ridiculous. And you can have the Planet Fitnesses of the world that says we don't judge anybody unless you work out too hard or are transphobic. And then you can have the other places that don't have that rule. And the same with co-ed. I've been to co-ed nude beaches, and it's fine. I prefer going to gay nude beaches, obviously, but like you can go to both. And if you can do nude beaches that way, there's no reason that communal showers couldn't also be the same. I do think for certain age groups, it makes more sense to have segregation. So at my gym, there's a men's locker room and there's a women's locker room. And they're very clearly labeled 18 and over only. And they have signs posted. If you see anybody under 18, notify the staff. But then the under 18 locker room, so-called the family locker room, is everybody under 18. So boys, girls. And I always thought that was a little weird because you have 17-year-old boys with girls who are everything from 17 down. And I think that's way more risky than having 16, 17, 15-year-old boys in with men, adult men. So, and I don't think it would be smart to have like teenage boys and teenage girls in co-ed. But adults, sure. And of course, are teenagers, adults, other topic. But it depends on the facilities and depends on what's going on there. I think it could work in many circumstances, and that there might be other circumstances where it's maybe not the best. But I don't think that there's a one nation policy for that. Uh, what about hot, sweaty gladiators? As long as it's voluntary, I don't mind. Uh, are there any romantic comedies you like as a gay man? No. Do you like Greek dancers? I don't know any. Thanks for your support. Now I don't feel communal showers anymore. Why did you fear communal showers in the first place? Uh, sure, but people did vote for Hoover. They voted for him before the Depression happened. They did not vote for him after. And the thing is, you could claim that Hoover did make the Depression worse, and he did help bring it about. Although there again, the inflation was going on before his presidency. But it was hard for him to claim this is not my fault at all. Trump will now be able to say all the economic problems are from COVID. Now, I think that's wrong. I think there were economic problems before COVID that will persist after COVID. But when he says it's all COVID's fault, that's going to sound plausible to most people. And it's true that it's contributed too. So that's a very plausible excuse that he has. And the fact that Biden was like, we shouldn't close the airports with China, and also he doesn't know what day it is or what state he's in or what office he's running for, people aren't going to want to vote for that. And there's also other reasons, all the acrimony with Bernie. A lot of Bernie supporters are just not going to go for Biden, whether they vote for a third party or for Trump or not at all. He's got major problems with them. So I think that Trump is, I don't want to say it's a sure thing, but it's looking likely that he'll get reelected, in my opinion. You really BTFO'd that communist guy, lol. What is BTFO? What does that mean? People didn't vote for Hoover. Well, they voted for him before. Not, but I'm pretty sure that when he lost, it was one of the biggest landslides ever. I know it also was a landslide in the Congress. The Democrats made like the biggest historical gains ever, and it took until like the 50s for that to undo. And it never undid. Like the policies, we still live with the New Deal in a lot of ways, sadly. But Hoover couldn't have said this is all because of a virus that I had nothing to do with. And there's things that Trump could have done to make COVID less of a problem, but not a lot. There was no way that wasn't going to get to the United States and not going to spread. There really wasn't, even if he had been as draconian as China, was. So he made some mistakes, but they weren't mistakes that are going to. And the other thing is, a lot of the mistakes, we could blame him for this, but they're like regulations. COVID-19. They were mistakes of over-regulation from like the FDA and the CDC. And the thing is, the liberals are never going to they're never going to get mad about over-regulation. It's just in their worldview, that's invisible. It doesn't matter if you point it out and say, look, here is a time scale of every time the CDC and the FDA stopped, masks, tests. The worst one was testing. Oh, we had like a 6-week delay on tests because of the FDA. Liberals, that's not, overregulation is not wrong ever, in their opinion. It does not matter how many people die. They are blind to it. They will never see it. And so they will never criticize Trump for that, no matter how partisan they are. And nobody's pointing that out. So, and also Trump could plausibly claim, I didn't implement those regulations because he didn't, and I don't favor them because he probably doesn't. He probably doesn't even know about them. If he'd been really smart, he would have abolished them all sooner, but he didn't. So no, I don't think that they have much of a leg to stand on. There's no plausible way to argue that a Democrat would have been better than Trump. What do you think about Larkin Rose? So I loved his IRS documentary, and I've seen him speak a couple times, and he is quite a firebrand, and he's a smart guy. I think he's a little bitter, But that's fair enough for a guy who went to prison for as long as he did. So, not going to really begrudge him that. Uh, we had a shower in high school, but they were rarely used even after football games. So if you had to shower, how are they rarely used? I don't understand. If you had to use them, I feel like they would be used all the time. Were you straight, then became bi, then became gay, or were you just always gay? I was always gay. But it is common for gay guys to identify as bi at one point, straight and then bi. That's a normal thing. I think I was raised. I think if we raise children to accept nudity in a non-sexual way, then co-ed communal showers for teens would not be an issue. That's. I think there's probably something to that, and I think that's fine, and that it's good when kids are raised with less, with more nudity, familiar nudity first, and then with other social groups. So I think that there's. I couldn't say that there would never be an issue. I wouldn't want to preclude the possibility that having sex subject uh, segregated by sex sometimes, because I think that would be make sense in some circumstances, but I wouldn't say it's always wrong for sure. Uh, I fear them because I was new to the country and my school has mandatory showers. Never showered naked in front of other guys before. I think it helps you to accept your body. Wait. Are you the guy from Spain who messaged the group about that? There was somebody messaged the communal showering group when it first started who said that he was moving to the States and that the boarding school had communal showers and he was terrified, and he was messaging the communal shower group basically to ask, how can I get out of it? Is there any advice you can give me on how to avoid these? And I said, hey, this is the people here are going to encourage you to do it. And I'm not sure that there's anything that we can say to get you out of it because it sounds like it's mandatory there. And sure enough, a couple months later, he messaged back and he said, hey, just checking back in. We did communal showers at the thing and I had a great time and it's normal and I'm over it. So, if that's you, that's awesome. If it's not you, that's cool. I want to hear more details about your story if that's the case. Um, I think Senior Bush only lost because of Ross Perot took potential voters away from him. Though Clinton was very charismatic leader at the time, what do you think? Well, there's no question that Ross Perot was a huge contributing factor. He was the last third-party guy to have a big impact. And was that enough in and of itself? I don't know for sure. It might have been. But there was other stuff too. Read my lips, no new taxes. He didn't follow up on that. And it's also we'd had 8 years of Reagan and then 4 years of Bush. That's unusual to have the same party for 12 years. We haven't had that very often since. I think that was the first time since FDR that had happened. And so and also actually no, because we had FDR and then Truman, so it was even worse then. But Clinton was very, very good. All right, he is a genius. He's extremely charismatic. He's one of the most able policy. People talk about Obama. I don't think he holds a candle to Bill Clinton. Obama is more squeaky clean in terms of like he's not fucking everything in sight. And he never was a Confederate the way like Bill Clinton was. If you look at the campaign stuff from '92, there's Clinton Gore with Confederate flag, Dixie for Clinton and all that kind of stuff. But he is just way more savvy when he talks to people. And he also, this is something I've learned recently from listening to Jimmy Dore, he really adopted a lot of Republican positions. So apparently Reagan crushed the Democrats so badly that there was like, an identity crisis. And many of them said, hey, we got to give up on a lot of these hard left issues. And they became what would now derisively be called neoliberals instead of New Deal socialists. So, in that sense, he's superior to, other politicians. I hate, look, I became an anarchist by looking at things that Bill Clinton did because he is a horrible criminal. But he's also, his cynicism and his opportunism is such that he doesn't really have any ideals and he doesn't try and do stuff because he's an ideologue. And so there's a lot of shit that he didn't do. I mean, we could have done the Iraq War in his. We did a little bit. We did like the. I don't want to diminish it because we did the blockade and like 1 million children died, but we didn't outright invade, other than like the airstrikes and all that. Which again, not to diminish that, but it's famously, Osama bin Laden was very happy when Bush got elected because he's like, Clinton's not taking the bait. Bush will take the bait, which he did. Although, to be fair, what would have Bill Clinton happened if 9/11 had happened in 2000 or 1998? We don't know. Uh, the liberals are against regulations on immigration, though. Yeah, on those immigrations, that's a fair point, Berkovic. Larkin Rose is a little bitter. Well, he's bitter against the government because they threw him in prison, and he strikes me as the no truth Scotsman type. Like, I'm the real libertarian because I went to prison and I'm an anarchist. And I mean, sure, I'm an anarchist too, and I didn't go to prison, but not yet anyway. So, but that's not really a strong dig. I mean, he's done some really good stuff. Do you think that wealth inequality is the reason economic collapses are so much worse these days? No. I think that the reason that they're worse and worse is because we're having higher and higher inflation, more and more money printing, which means we have bigger and bigger Cantillon effects. So, as Ron Paul always pointed out, this is his great contribution to the general understanding of economics, is that when you print money from nothing, that is not some magical panacea. The people who get the money first get it at the old value. So if the purchasing power, let's say right now, a dollar can buy you, one loaf of bread, and then the government prints $5 trillion. Well, that first time they print that money, who they give it to, and who they give it to first, maybe they'll give it to the military, maybe they'll give it to Goldman Sachs, maybe they'll give it to Bank of America or whoever. When they get it and they spend it, they get they get a loaf of bread with it. But as those trillions of dollars spread through the economy, after a while, that dollar is only going to get you, half a loaf of bread. And what happened in the exchange, in the interim, is that wealth, real goods, real material things or assets, material things and legal titleships were transferred to the people who got the money first. This is called Cantillon effects, and they've been known about for 200 years. Now, that does cause a concentration of wealth. Now, I'm not somebody who thinks that concentrations of wealth are necessarily bad. I see why people think that, and there are certain ethical intuitions that lead people to that conclusion. I'm not sold on it, but what does happen is you get these Cantillon effects, and you get this overinvestment in certain types of capital-intensive industries, and so you end up with all this stuff that makes sense not for the real resources in the economy, but for the paper resources in the economy, the number of dollars in the system, but not the amount of stuff in the system. And this disconnect will eventually lead to a collapse. We had them, but we didn't use them. So you never used them, or it just was rare? I'm the Spanish guy. Okay, hey Nathan, good to see you. Nice to hear from you. I know that you're not in school right now, but that's awesome. And like I'm glad that, I mean, we couldn't really help you because you were asking how to get out of it, and like nobody there was going to tell you how to get out of it. But I'm glad that you um, got over it. And that's another thing that's changed, is that all through there's evidence that all through the 20th century there were people who said, I don't want to do this, it makes me uncomfortable, and their gym teacher, their coach, their whatever, their football coach would just say, get over it. And the thing is, that attitude isn't always a good thing to have. If you're getting molested and they say, get over it, no, it's not okay. Or as Jonathan Haidt says, it's okay to get hurt. We just don't want you to die. So like if someone's asking you to do something that you could die, you know, that's probably not good. But if we're asking you to like go on a balance beam or a fireman pole where like you might break a leg, that's a risk that you should learn to take. And communal showering does not, you're not going to die. It's not even remotely that bad. So that is something that you should, quote, get over it. And what changed is we had what's called the students' revolution or the students' rights revolution, which was good in certain ways and bad in others. But there was this idea then that administrators, principals, teachers, coaches were not willing to tell a kid, quote, get over it. And then they didn't get over it, and now they're just a bunch of snowflakes, and their character has been warped. They're insecure. So it's actually been detrimental in a lot of ways. So Clinton's probably the best politician of the 20th century. Clinton. Yeah, I agree. And actually, Jared, when I was talking, I was remembering the things you told me about how you met people who were basically mesmerized by him. I've never met him, but like watching him speak, it is clear he knows how to figure out what you want to hear or what he can say that will appeal to your intuitions exactly right. And he can manipulate the fuck out of just about anybody. So, and I've heard like that he remembers everybody's name, that when he walks into a room, everybody there feels like he's, clued into them and paying attention to them. So he never came across as haughty or holier than thou. So, the guy is clearly a genius, and I don't think that there's any comparison between him and Obama. I was saying people say Obama, and I'm like, yeah, that's because they don't know Bill Clinton. Clinton came at Bush on Israel from the right. Now that I didn't know. Reagan. So in the prime minister's book, it was pretty clear that Reagan did not like Menachem Begin, and neither did Carter. They hated him. They thought that he was a fucking maniac, which he was. And Reagan was really pissed about what happened in Lebanon. Basically, Menachem Begin said that when they invaded Lebanon, they would only go 30 kilometers in, and then they didn't do that. They went all the way to Beirut, and then there was this huge massacre there, um, where these militias under the protection of the IDF just murdered like 3,000 Arab Christians, and Reagan was not very happy about that. You listen to Jimmy Dore, Ryan Dawson's been trying to debate Dore for years on Dore's refusal to address Israel's responsibility for a horrible foreign policy. So I do listen to Jimmy Dore, and there's things about Jimmy Dore that I absolutely hate. He's terrifying in a lot of ways, and he's also a bit of a snake. Um, I heard he spit on Alex Jones when Alex Jones did that when he barged into Jenk. He also says stuff like, Bernie needs to take power. He needs to take power. I'm like, I don't fucking, he wants to take power. He's dangerous. He's also delusional. Oh, we're going to go on strikes and all that. So he's an old school leftist, but I like listening to him because then you can attack the left from the left and see what this guy says. So I do listen to Jimmy Dore quite a bit, and he's actually funny too. So I'm not gonna look. He's wrong. His intuitions are wrong about almost everything. His politics are wrong. His economics are wrong. I didn't know that Dawson's been trying to debate him, and that's fair because I never hear him talk about Palestine or Israel ever. So yeah, Dore will talk about American imperialism, but will never mention Zionism or Israel. Okay, well that's very conspicuous. That's very, very conspicuous. Again, if people feel that way, people should talk about it. We have to talk about it. As soon as we become silent, just to go back to the meta issue on this thing, as soon as you stop talking about it, you're going to lose. You have no chance if you don't want to talk about it. You have to make it normalized. You have to find people. You have to find the remnant who agree with you. You have to convince other people, and you cannot do that if you're secretive. And if you treat the things that you believe as criminal thoughts, as wrong think, you will never persuade anybody. If I was like, listen, all this politics stuff, but I like communal showers, and here's why, but I don't want, that's not going to sell it. And I don't feel that it's something I should be ashamed about. Okay, so I'll explain why, and I have however many reasons it takes, and whether we're talking about Zionism, uh, the Fed, inflation, taxes, welfare, Medicare, hospitals, defense, gun rights, especially gun rights, communal showers, or circumcision, I can talk about it, and I will talk about it. And if you believe in those things and you don't talk about it, then you're just surrendering it to the people who are willing to say something. But a dollar in 1913 would be $30 today. Yeah, and there's all kinds of things. It discourages savings. It encourages debt. Uh, right? You wouldn't have to invest in the stock market if there was deflation, because the money that you saved when you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 would buy more when you're 70, 80, 90. So it would make sense to, quote, save it. And then that dollar that bought you one loaf of bread when you were 20, when you're 30, when you're retired, it will buy you 3 loaves of bread or 4 loaves of bread. And then and so it gives people a lower time preference, which is in general a virtue. It's not necessarily ethically wrong or right, but in terms of actual virtues, if you want to look at Deidre McCloskey, the actual 6 virtues of the bourgeoisie virtues, deflation is better. Another really good book on that, by the way, is The Ethics of Money Production by Guido Husman, which is, I think it's a really underrated book. It's very short. It's a very quick read, but he just kind of covers that comprehensively, and that's a really good review of that topic. A couple guys would use them. That's it. Everyone else waited to go. Were you one of those guys or no? Foreskins and communal showering. Hi, Greg. In my university, there were communal showers, and it wasn't that bad. That's nice. Hey, Tortoise, how's it going? Cantillon? Cantillon? I say Cantillon, but if you say Cantillon, I'll defer. It's French, so Cantillon is a legendary brewery from the Belgium. Maybe they're named after the same name. I'm gonna have to watch the replay of this. Got to learn about coronavirus testing. Okay, there you go. Priorities. So the stock market took off in 1913. Well, it took off in the 20s. Uh, the I don't think the Fed did a ton of inflation until World War One, but then during World War One, there are all kinds of wage and price controls, so there was all kinds of wacky stuff. Then there was a huge collapse in 1921, and that the government didn't do anything to, they just cut the budget and lowered taxes and lowered regulations, and it was like an 18-month depression, and everything got over. And yes, it inflated out throughout the 20s. There was basically an issue where the British went off sterling, so they had basically gold reserve or silver reserve for the pound that they went off during World War One, and they couldn't. They wanted to go back, but they became a welfare state in the course of World War One as well, and so they had all this increased government spending that they couldn't really afford by staying attached to gold. So they did what their trick was. We'll do a dollar reserve standard. So sterlings couldn't be redeemed in species, but dollars could, and so the Bank of England would hold dollars in reserve. So you could change in your sterling to get dollars, and then exchange your dollars to get gold from the U.S. So there was like this indirect, and you can pyramid more that way because you just realize fewer people are going to take that extra step. Some people will, some people won't, and so you can inflate a little bit more off of a certain fixed value of species. But by the end of the 20s, they were doing more and more. And the head of the Federal Reserve, I'm going to forget his name at the time, but he was really good friends with the head of the Bank of England. They had very similar ideologies. Fuck, I should remember his name. But a good book in here is The History of Money and Banking by Murray Rothbard, among others. And so the Fed again, fractional reserves. So they were printing more than they had reserves, but they had some reserves. You could still redeem in gold in the U.S., but they were printing more than they actually had. And there are progressive steps to make it harder. So they started saying you couldn't redeem until you did large denominations. So if you showed up and you had like $1.50 or $20, they'd say no. You'd have to have like $1,000, $10,000. It got to the point where you'd have to have millions of dollars, and eventually they made it so that only other central banks could do it in 1933 after the Depression. Nope, I did in university though. Okay, soon, better late than never. Expectation and reality of housing prices and stock market just going up all the time is a large cause of inflation, maybe part of the bait and switch that we are all getting rich. So there's more than one definition of inflation that people use. I use the definition of if you increase the monetary base, that's inflation. If new money is created, that's inflation. And so you can have inflation with gold. If you mine more gold and mint it into bullion, that's inflation. And that has happened. That happened when the Spanish took over the New World and they started importing all of this Inca and Aztec gold. And there was something like 1% inflation per year for 100 years. And it really messed up the economy in Europe. Um, what most people seem to think of inflation as prices going up. Now, when you increase the money supply, prices do tend to go up, though not evenly. The problem with defining inflation as prices going up is that prices can go up for lots of reasons. So, like, if there is an embargo on sugar, then sugar prices will go up. But and so people are like, oh, there's an inflation in sugar prices, but not in corn syrup prices. But so housing prices can go up for reasons like there could be demand. So like in the oil booms in North Dakota, housing prices skyrocketed, and it wasn't because there was a lot. Well, there was inflation going on too, but it was demand was going up, right? So I don't like the price inflation one because you cannot separate how much of this is from monetary inflation and how much of this is from supply and demand and the arbitrage of the market. You really can't. With price inflation, you could, or with like monetary expansion, you can say this is how much we expanded the monetary supply. So that's when I say inflation, that's what I mean. That's the definition I think is the most useful and makes the most sense. I think that it's makes more sense when you're talking about a specific commodity to talk about its price increasing or its demand curve increasing, not to talk about its price inflating. But any thoughts on Bitcoin USD? Seems coupled to stocks right now. People covering margins. I haven't following, so I don't know. No thoughts. I look very closely at my skin on my penis, and there seems to have been minor stretch marks. Don't use high tension. Is that bad? Common. I've heard of that before. I've not experienced that. You might post in a forum to get more feedback. My take is if it doesn't hurt, if it's comfortable, it's probably fine though. Um, Also, in the steam room in the college where I go, most guys go in naked, which kind of surprised me because of the negative feedback of communal showering. Wait, what college do you go to? And what do you mean the negative feedback on communal showering? Is it wise for individuals to view their own houses as investments? I understand people who fix, rent, sharecrop, or speculate. No, no, it's not. If you are living in it, it's consumption. A house is not an investment. Now, you point out the valid exceptions there. If you're drawing rents from it, if you're flipping it and selling it at a profit, that's different. Otherwise, no, you're just living in it. The fact that its price goes up and down, if you're not selling it at that point, you're not making money off of it. So, um, no, it's not an investment. It's a cost. You sink money into it. Yep. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon in the sense that it can be produced only by more rapid increase in quantity of money. And yep, Friedman. So we have the Austrians and the Friedmans. And the Chicago people agreeing, which is, means that it's true, basically. With price inflation, there has been deflation in electronics for decades. It's like 90%. Yeah, it's amazing, Jared, if you think about it, if we've had a gold standard this whole time, that would have been magnified many, many, many fold. And as Keynes pointed out, wages tend to be sticky. So, uh, yeah, we would be looking. It would sound like it would sound comical, but we would probably be talking about brand new computers costing, $1.50 or $3 or $5 or something like that, or maybe less. You'd be buying cars for $1,200, $1,000, maybe less, $800, $700. Again, maybe less. Um, if you look, because I think like the original Model T was it like 250, and so it's plausible that it would be less than that. That we would be paying $100 for a new car. Um, and like a new computer could be $5. So, and food would be measured in pennies and nickels. Like you would go to the food and fill up your thing, and you would like here's $3 or whatever for the week. So now your wages would be less too, but it would be way more fair. You wouldn't have all this concentration from the Cantillon effects, where a lot of it's going to investments and into stocks, and into corporations and to dividends, and into speculation in the housing market. It would be going into a higher purchasing power for every dollar that you have, every penny that you have, even. That's the weird thing is people are like shocked at how much more you could buy with less back in and because of the technological revolution that we've had, the technological revolution is so intense that in some cases it's actually outpaced inflation. Like you said, in computers and cell phones and televisions and LASIK eye surgery or whatever else, it just would have been true for everything and for some things even more than others. Um, just buy gold, people. Yeah, buy gold, silver, guns, ammo, toilet paper, seeds, food, land. I was going to say the same thing. I've even heard people who speak of cars that way. It's consumption. Yeah. Other than you flipping them or running a car business, it's consumption. People really delude themselves about that kind of stuff. And spending. I'm going to put $20,000 into a new bathroom, but it's an investment. No, it's not. You're not going to get 20,000 more when you sell the house. I go to college in Calgary, Canada, and according to my coaches, there was a petition to install barriers between each shower. What sports do you play? And GB Oria, I'll try and find it for you. There's a really good study that was done on communal versus stalls versus barriers that I posted in the Communal shower subreddit. And the researcher found that communal is way better for community building and bonding and socializing. And you might want to show that to your coaches before they obliterate a good thing. Uh, Coronavirus will be the end of communal showers since nobody wants to be around anyone else. Not if I have anything to say about it. It's crazy that most economists today see inflation as the more dangerous than inflation. Deflation has never brought bankruptcy. Yeah, you never hear about the hyperdeflation that destroyed an economy. It's always about stagflation and hyperinflation, and we can stack up so many on that. And the deflationary claims are, again, I think the problem there is they like inflation because they like to meddle. They don't. They not metal, but metal. Um, they You can't indulge your own conceit in an economy that's based on sound money, on precious metals and species. All right, you can't work your wonder magic then and have this budget. And again, uh, I think Brian Kaplan or Bob Murphy, I don't remember which one, wrote a good article about because they don't come at it like Paul Krugman's an idiot. Paul Krugman's not an idiot. He's brilliant. He's a really smart guy, but his politics predate his expertise in economics. He was a leftist before he became an economist. He believed that he was a New Deal socialist, a New Deal Democrat before he ever picked up an economics textbook. And so, when he did pick up an economics textbook, he he engaged in motivated reasoning and selection bias. And we all do this. I mean, Brian Kaplan did this too, just from the other perspective. And so you rise through the ranks, and then you get into these institutions and you have all this authority conveyed on you from them. And the point is, someone like Krugman will say, well, I have a Nobel Prize, so I'm right about everything. It's like, yeah, but people who disagree with you on every single point have also won the Nobel Prize. So that's just an argument from authority. And we can see that his politics have informed him from day one. And that's the same thing with Thomas Piketty, and it's the same thing with all of them. And so then becomes a debate whose politics are right and make more sense and are less, have fewer problems. And with Krugman, he is like wafted. There's been a couple times where, so famously, he after the .com bust, he said, well, what the Fed should do now is create a housing bubble. And that came back to bite him, and now he's saying, oh, I didn't mean it, that was a joke or whatever. In the context of what he said, though, it was clear that's what he wanted to have happen. Speaking of coronavirus, I wish it would end immigration, most international travel, and public transportation. Well, it will end some of those things, at least temporarily. Is cereal soup? I don't know what that means. GB, what sports do you play? Something about the scare tactics of deflation bothers me. We've had inflation for a long time. I'd rather see a correction, which would be deflation. Yeah, it is interesting how they demonize it. Like, what's the worst that can? It's the same thing with, they're like, well, we had to have a Fed because before the Fed, we had all these, all these panics. And I'm like, we've had much worse panics with the Fed over and over and over and over again. I mean, we have the post World War I, the crash of 21. We have the worst one ever, the Great Depression, the crash of 29. After World War II, the stagflation of the 70s. We've got the crash in 89. We've got the dot-com bubble. We've got the great crash of 2008. Now we're having another one. Now we're getting them every 10 years, and they're worse than any of the previous ones ever. And yet it's not the Fed's fault, no matter what. It doesn't matter how. And it's crazy that they'll argue stuff like, yeah, the crash of 29 doesn't count. They started in 1913. So they had 16 years later. It's like, what would it take? None of the pre-Fed collapses were as bad as the post-Fed ones, and there have been more. So yeah, the panic of 1907, the panic of 1837. None of these were even remote. Like the bimetallicism of the 70s, when there was deflation, when they were retiring greenbacks. So they did this inflation in the Civil War, and then they paid down the debt. They got rid of they paid off the greenbacks. They redeemed them in silver eventually. None of that was even remotely as bad as what we have now. So it's just, and that's when our economy just fundamentally went from subsistence to, everybody's rich and fat. And there was more social mobility and blah, blah, blah. And we were taking in even more immigrants at that time. So yeah, we went from India to modern times with that. And they're going to say, no, we need the Fed. It doesn't matter how many depressions there are. It's never the Fed's fault. Like, from these people, there's nothing the Fed can do that's wrong other than not be more involved. Has Free State Project been successful? Well, they have 20,000 signers, so that means they all need to move here. Has it reached its end goal? No. Is it having an effect? Yes. How much of an effect does it need to have for it to be considered successful? That's debatable. So if you want to set a rubric there, let me know. There's lots of free staters who have been elected. There's lots of legislation that has either been passed or been stopped from being passed. And there is social change that's happening, right, on an individual level. So there's a lot that's happened. I wish a lot more has happened, so that's debatable. But I think that I mean, when people bring that up, I want to ask, well, what do you know that's doing anything even remotely as close? And the answer is nothing in almost all cases. The other scare tactic is that if the economy improves, we will get inflation. I looked back at the Roaring Twenties, and they even had a bit of deflation for a bit. The problem with deflation is that we have long-term financial contract that are created with the assumption of continual, never-ending inflation. Yeah, but those can be adjusted to accommodate deflation. This is what I find interesting: is people are like, we can't calculate deflation. No, you can calculate deflation as easily as you can calculate inflation. It doesn't matter if in 20 years, you're going to get paid less for a good because what you get paid is going to buy as much or more. And so yes, it's the same math. It's the same math problem. But instead of, you know, decreasing purchasing power by a certain percentage, you're increasing purchasing power by a certain percentage. So, and those can change. A contract like that can be renegotiated or remade on the assumption like, hey, this is what's going on. The minimum wage gets way more harmful in a deflationary environment, and politicians can't score points reducing it periodically than they can increasing it periodically in an inflation market. Yeah, so that's true. If you have deflation, you really can't. A minimum wage is going to definitely cause way more unemployment, and a politician is not going to be able to lower the minimum wage and say, hey, look, we've helped you. So that's true. I don't think that that is the reason, though, that they favor inflation generally. That's just a side benefit from their point of view. I ran, sprint, trace walked during my first 2 years, but now I'm out of shape. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, go ahead and look in the Communal subreddit, which I put in the link here. And there was a study done by a guy comparing stalls versus Communal. And Communal are definitely better for socializing and for like team building and bonding and all that. So that's something that you should definitely show the coaches there so they don't get rid of the Communal stalls. Um, why should there be any immigration? Why are we allowing people to come here and create an outpost of their nation here? It is colonization and it destroys wages. Certainly doesn't destroy wages. Uh, Government destroys wages. Um, and I think that that's right and wrong. I mean, if people are coming here and they're like, well, we hate America and we want to establish a caliphate here, then you have a point. If they're coming here and they say, I want to be an American and I love America and I love the American dream and okay, then I don't know how that's true. Now, if you want to argue, I mean, look, I have a friend who he's a subscriber. He's a capitalist. He's got a family. He's got 3 kids. He wants to have more. He owns his own small business. He works very hard. He lives in the UK. It's almost impossible for him to move here, and that's just it's just like an outrage to me that he can't. It's very very hard for him to move here. We had open immigration for a long time, and it was fine. Like, were wages getting destroyed constantly through the 19th century? They were going up. Purchasing power was going up. We didn't get colonized by the Italians or the Irish or the Russians or whoever. Should people in romantic relationships be allowed to shower together? If they want to, obviously. that title, Communal Showers. Sticky wages, minimum wage are the reason Keynesianites like inflation. Inflation equals lower real wages, higher employment, but inflation equals theft. You're unlikely to hear that argument from non-libertarians. Yeah. As Ron Paul said, inflation is a tax, and it definitely is. It's a hidden tax. It's the inflation tax. But Paul Krugman likes taxes. So all of those early European immigrants in the early 20th century came from totalitarian. Yeah, a lot of Germans. I think that there might be an argument, like if you're gonna do a litmus test and you ask people, do you believe in America and you believe in freedom and the Bill of Rights, and if they say fuck no, I want to establish communism, okay, don't let them come. But if they say, yeah, I do, I believe in America, I mean, I have a friend who's from Belarus, and he's all about the Second Amendment, and he's all about freedom. He takes it probably more seriously than your average American, and so do my other friends who want to come here. So I wish that they could. Like they are, and it's funny because they would come here and they would pay taxes, and if you say welfare and all that, well, I'm on board with that. I don't think we should have welfare for Americans. And if you want to stipulate, say, well, if you're an immigrant, you don't get any of that. I'm fine with that. But then there's still people who would want to come. Do, do, do. Should, when did we have open immigration? Up until I think it was like 1926, it was pretty much open immigration. They would check people for diseases, and that was pretty much it. So if you didn't have like cholera or typhoid fever or whatever, they'd let you in. And then they established a quota system that was based on the census, I think, of 1890, where they just said, well, what was the nationality origin then, and then they set quotas based on that. So if 8% of the population was Italian and 12% was German and 15% was Irish, then the total immigration, which I think was set at like 1 million or something like that, was then divided up among those and then allocated to those countries. I can see an argument for some economic protectionism on the basis of placing value on cultural institutions and fully accepting the material cost incurred. For example, what cultural institutions? i.e., Japan could place tariffs. Oh, I asked the question as you answer it in the next comment. Rice industry, they will pay more for rice, but they will be Japanese. But it will be Japanese, and if you're okay with that trade-off, why not? Well, the problem is that I'm sure some people will be okay with that trade-off and some people wouldn't. So you'll have somebody in Japan who will be like, I'm willing to pay more for my rice if it's Japanese rice as opposed to imported rice. And then you'll probably have other people in Japan who'd be like, I really don't care. I'd rather pay less for rice. And probably a lot of those people in that camp will be poor people who think, uh, you know, uh, 40% of my income goes to my food, and if I can save 20% on rice, I'm going to do that. So then the problem becomes, well, so we're just going to vote, and if a majority goes one way, then that's the correct answer. And then you're just imposing that on the minority, which in Japan, that could be 20, 30, 50 million people. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Are we just talking about might makes right, majority rules, assuming that majoritarian outcomes are utilitarian or ethical in some sense? And I know that you probably don't think so. So that's the problem there. Now, if it was unanimous, then it's not a problem. It's never going to be unanimous. And then we get into this principle of like, well, do you need, 50.001 versus 49.9999, or does it have to be 75-25 or what? So um, because that argument could boil down, practically speaking, to some people are going to starve or go hungry so that you can have the satisfaction of eating Japanese rice. And even if you are a majority, I'm not sure that's necessarily a good outcome. The first immigration restrictions laws were on Chinese. That's wrong, Pentazoid. The first immigration restrictions were against slaves. You couldn't import slaves after 1808. Come on. But yeah, the yellow scare in the 1880s, there were restrictions on Japanese as well. Their argument was different then. Their argument that those people would outcompete us, that they were too productive, and that they would they were too frugal and that sort of thing. Why wouldn't a nation protect itself against economic warfare? You mean supplying its consumers with cheap goods? Like, how is that economic warfare? They're invading us with low prices? Yes, protectionism on that basis requires to be on board with a bit of degree of I know better paternalism. Well, if that's the principle, though, then there's no limit to that. I know better on everything then, and you can just impose your will on anything as long as you get a majority. And the thing is, we know that majorities don't necessarily know better on any topic. Yeah, California had laws that made it for Japanese couldn't own land, and then they all got confiscated anyway by FDR. They got thrown into concentration camps, but not in Hawaii, but in there. Yeah. Yes, destroy nation's industry by dumping products. No, Cato Weiser, what's destroying our industry is the government. Okay, the government is tying our hands. The reason Chinese goods are so cheap is because we have all these labor regulations and labor restrictions where you can't have teenagers work, you can't have children work, you can't have factories. Like, there's all these regs that make it more expensive to hire Americans. So why don't you care about that? Why is it the reason all like they're the same people who will say this are the same people who will praise all these progressive restrictions on labor, this welfare managerial state. And I think that there's absolutely no connection between that and jobs going overseas to China. There's a huge connection with that. The fact that we have to pay workers so much, the fact that we can only work them so much, the fact that we are, and it's not just the capitalists are going to own us. It's that people can't freely make those decisions, and they should be able to. The fact that we have 20 million teenagers who can't work more than 5 hours a day, 20 hours a week at certain jobs is a huge problem. You know, so and it's just everybody, the hours they can work, the fact that there's overtime, like the fact that there's minimum wage, all these things raises the cost of industry being here, and the regulations raise the cost of being here. And if you want to make some middle ground and be like, well, there's some regulations I really think there need to be, we can debate about that. But the more we have, the harder it is for us to compete. There's no question about it. And it's not the Chinese who are imposing the regulations on us. It's the Democrats and it's the Republicans colluding with them. That's the main problem. Let's do that first and then see what happens. In the meantime, we can take their cheap goods. And if we do all that and it's still a problem, then let's talk about it. How about that? They're not the ones destroying our industry. Our taxes are destroying our industry. Our regulations are destroying our industry. Or am I wrong about that? You think that the tax code isn't onerous, and you think that the regulatory state isn't, we're not regulating enough? Okay, cater the why. Yes. Why are you opposed child labor? If a child wants to work, who are you to stop them? So here's this huge disconnect you have in your thinking. You are calling for the regulations that make us uncompetitive with other countries. And then you think that it's their warfare against us. It's us imposing the regulations. Okay? It's our government imposing those regulations. And maybe you don't know this, but it's the capitalists who lobby for those regulations. The capitalists are the ones who want that to be put on you. It wasn't the children who lobbied for child labor to end. It was millionaires who lobbied for child labor to end. It was Jane Addams. I did a review on her book. Like, it was these progressive communists who wanted to end, who wanted to impose a utopian view, and they wanted to get rid of their competition. So they created competition to get, they created regulation to get regulatory capture. Whether we're talking about the FDA and the food industry, right? Whether we're talking about auto industry, whether we're talking about steel, whether we're talking about the utility companies, everything. If we deregulated, we'd have more choice, we'd have more competition, we'd have lower prices, and we'd have higher employment and cheaper goods. And you uh, don't want any of that. You want to have a regulatory state, and then you want to bitch about how China's stealing our jobs. We're tying The Chinese communists are not the ones tying our hands. It's the progressives, the Democrats, and they're colluding fucking Republicans. Have you ever read The Failure of the New Economics by Henry Hazlitt? I have. His line by line rebuke of Keynes's general theory is very amusing. General theory has so much esoteric, vague nonsense. It's amazing. I should read the general theory. I've talked to people who have, and they say that that's true. That you can barely understand it. Now that Lincoln Chafee has dropped out of the LP, do you think Jacob Hornberger is guaranteed? I don't know. I like Hornberger, so I'm happy if that's the case, but I don't know if it's a sure thing. I know a gym where there's mostly mid-teens and younger guys showering nude in the communal showers. Okay, what's the name of the gym and where is it? Thank you, Richard Wilson, for the info. What do you think of the late Russell Kirk? So I actually grew up really near to where Russell Kirk was from. He had this place called the Hermitage, I think, in a little tiny town called Mecosta, Michigan, which was very close to where I grew up. And he is one of the only quote unquote conservative thinkers. So he's a paleo conservative thinker who started writing like in the 50s, and I think he died in the early 90s or mid 90s. And I started reading one of his books, The Foundations of American Authority. And I don't think, I mean, he's a thoughtful guy, like he's intellectually honest. He thought that George H.W. Bush should have been hung from a tree for the first Iraq War. Um, but I don't think it's that compelling. I think conservatism is not that compelling. It's in Canada, the main university at the University of Toronto. I guess I'll have to visit and you'll have to show it to me. When I drove back to Michigan for Christmas, I saw Toronto in the distance because I went through Buffalo and Niagara, and you can see it across that little spit of Lake Ontario. Yeah, you're basically going to have to go to a university to find that kind of thing, though. Child cannot enter into a contract in general. Not legally now, but when do you think that changes? How old do you think you have to be to enter into a contract? Oh, so we're gonna have a Lengthyounarther subscriber meetup in the Toronto gyms. Awesome. and I'm not going to be there to witness it. That sucks. Now all I need is a percentage of the. Now all we need to know is what percentage of those guys have foreskins and which percent of them are cut, and we'll have it perfect. Well, I'm probably a paleocon. Well, if you're a conservative, wouldn't you want things to be like they were in the 1800s when we didn't have immigration laws and we didn't have regulations? Why do you want the progressive era regulations to exist? Why are you defending the things that Woodrow Wilson wanted and the socialist wanted and the communist wanted? Why have you adopted those into your conservative ideology? I don't understand. Like this is what I don't get. I'm a conservative and I believe in American patriotism, but only the America post World War One. I don't believe in the America from before then. I don't believe in an actual free market. I want a heavily regulated market where we have regulatory capture, where we have big corporations that control everything because they have a government to do that. They can't do it without the government. You can have a successful company that makes some people millionaires and do a good job in a free market. Absolutely. But they can't become an oligopoly. They can't become a monopoly. They can't become an oligopsony. They can't become a monopsony without the government getting involved. Probably earliest people can enter labor contracts is early in the teen years. So I agree. I've made a whole video on this called Teen 2.0, and it's right in the name, teen. And I think that most people probably can do it when they're 12 or 13. Or if I want to like be moderate or compromise, 14. Ideally, it would go on a person's ability to cognitive ability, which I don't think would be that difficult to measure. But I think most people would be able to do it around 14 at the latest. There were de facto immigration limits. It just wasn't practical. I don't know what you're talking about. Millions of people were coming here by boat every year. I don't even support an income tax. That's great. Good. I agree. We agree with that. But you support all kinds of regulations on minimum wage. You support all kinds of regulations on hours work, what kind of work. So, uh, even before asking those questions, you have to ask what a child. Older cultures treated teenagers as men and women, and puberty starts in the early teens. Yeah, totally valid question. If you listen to the guy who wrote Teen 2.0, and I heard him on an interview with Tom Woods. Tom Woods would every time Tom Woods would say kids, that guy would interject and be like, "A kid is a prepubescent. A kid is a prepubescent goat." It's from the Bible. It's what they call prepubescent goats. There is a physical difference and there is a physiological mental difference in somebody who has started and gone through puberty and somebody who hasn't. And the mental capacities of and the physical, mental, and cognitive abilities of humans skyrocket when they start puberty. Now that doesn't mean on day one of puberty they're an adult, but they rapidly get there and their abilities rapidly increase. And so I would say yes, it's probably 13 or 14. You're going to get the majority of that age cohort are going to be ready. The majority of them who are, if you're not able to sign a contract when you're 14, there's a good chance you're not going to be able ever, right? Because you're just in that bottom, whatever tenth of that bottom 1 or 2% that's just never going to be able to do it. Um, so we absolutely, and we're talking about 20 or 30 million people there. Do you find anti-Semitic Christians bizarre, given that Christianity is the offspring of Judaism? No, because a lot of the later books of the New Testament were clearly edited in an anti-Semitic way. If you listen to Bart Ehrman talk about this, when they analyze which part of the New Testaments are the oldest, that are the closest to the teachings of Jesus, and the ones that are maybe 200 or 300 years older, which they have ways of determining that. Um, it's clear that later there a much greater emphasis was placed on the Jews killing Jesus and the Jews as God killers and that sort of thing, and that has been part of the theology ever since. So, Jews, Christians have had a long history of an antipathy towards Jews, and also, and I think there are theological reasons for that that are independent of anything the Jews have done. On the other hand, I think the way Jewish culture works also has a way of alienating other people, because Jews are very clannish and Jews are very what's the term? They're very racist and they see themselves as better than everybody else, and they act that way, and they're very exclusive along those lines. And they also have a number of practices that are, quite frankly, very barbaric. Number one of which being circumcision. And even though that's blasé now, in the Middle Ages, that was considered really barbaric. Even in the classical period, that was considered really barbaric. And so, um, one of the things in the cultural critique brings up is that a lot of Jewish thinkers assume if people hate Jews, it's because they have a pathology. And it's possible that that could be true. There are people who do have pathologies, and sometimes that manifests as anti-Semitism. It's also possible that the actions of Jewish people can make people angry towards them. And so it's both. So I don't think it's that weird. Try reading Democracy, the God That Failed. That would appeal to you. I would also recommend that book. It's an excellent book. Uh, yeah, why do Christians support a group that denies their main thing, Jesus? Yeah, if you ever want to see Ben Shapiro squirm, see somebody ask him about what he thinks about Jesus, because he's kind of aligned himself with like the Judeo-Christian, all that stuff. But the thing is, the Jews think that Jesus was a heretic who was rightfully executed. They're on the side of Caiaphas and the Pharisees in that debate. So a little awkward. I mean, we could say 2,000 years ago, whatever, and it does seem like the Christian theology doesn't say that all Jews must convert or anything like that, just that they're Christ killers. I think a lot of them think that they have a role when Armageddon comes, but that's about it. Wasn't Jesus a Jew? Jesus claimed to be the king of the Jews. Jesus was a Jew, but most Jews denied Jesus was a Messiah. This made the Christians early. Yeah, so the Jews who thought he was a Messiah became Christians, and then the Jews who continued to believe that he wasn't the Messiah are still Jews, or became Muslims when they all converted to Islam years later. We would not need minimum wage laws if we had closed borders. What happens is the globalist capitalist class imports hordes of people to drive wages down to third world conditions. The globalist capitalist class are the ones putting in the minimum wage. They are the ones putting in the regulations, and you are defending them. Okay? That it's the progressive elite, the anti-conservative socialists. It's the Jimmy Dores of the world today, only 100 years ago. It's Woodrow Wilson, John Dewey, right? The liberal reformers. Louis Brandeis, Felix Frankfurter, FDR, right? Okay, not conservatives. All globalists. All globalists. You don't think that Wilson was a globalist or FDR was a globalist? Ha! They were globalists and they were progressive regulators. So don't carry water for them on this stuff. What airman have you read? So I've read How Jesus Became God, and when I say read, I just listen to the audio. You can listen to them for free on YouTube, by the way. A lot of his books, the audio is on YouTube for free. So just to go about How Jesus Became God is really good. I've also just watched probably 20 or 30 hours of his lectures. If you really want to watch a good one, he debates someone who denies Jesus was real. So he debates a mythicist, and I think he clobbers the guy. Uh, INRI. What is INRI? I need to do a field trip to Toronto, apparently. We need to work this out. Lengthyounarther Conference in Toronto. Uh, how do you think Jesus would be perceived if he came today? So again, Ehrman's book, How Jesus Became God, is very interesting. He also had, I think, a book like The Teachings of Jesus. So Ehrman's coming at it from the point of view that Jesus was real. He thinks that the evidence that Jesus was a real historical figure is overwhelming. The problem is that most of the writings we have, the New Testament writings, are the earliest ones that we have are from probably at least 30 years after his death. And at the time, and we can tell from those earliest writings that they are in fact based on earlier writings, which themselves are probably not, firsthand accounts. So we can see traces. They can do this by references about emperors and time periods that they can kind of figure out when they were written. So I think Matthew is probably the oldest gospel. I could be remembering this wrong, and that Matthew is probably from like the year 70, and then like uh, Luke and Mark are from maybe 20 or 30 years later, and then John is later still. Um, could be screwing with the dates there a little bit, and you can kind of tell which themes are the earliest and also which ones they all agree on. And so he talks about what Jesus actually believed. And there's not a ton because the way he says it is Christianity went from the religion of Jesus to a religion about Jesus. So the later revisions had an increasing Christology. So initially, Jesus was a Messiah, but in the Jewish sense that he was a king. He wasn't saying that he's the son of God or that he's an angel or that he is God himself. But then later Christologies added all this. So this idea that he initially that he was some kind of angelic being, and then also that he was a paramount angelic being, and then there was a debate of had he always existed or had he just come into existence when he was born? Did he have a virgin birth? Um, did he have a brother? Because there's this evidence in the records that he had a brother named James, and that he wasn't a virgin birth. So, but his original teachings were basically that he should be the king, that you should love everybody, that when you died, you either went to heaven or you went into oblivion, but there was no hell, and that one or two other things. I don't remember them all, but they're definitely listen to Bart Ehrman. Go and listen to 20 hours of Bart Ehrman, and that will really scratch that itch. Uh, Jeez. Oh no, we're all into Christianity now. Oh shit. Early Christians explicitly prohibited circumcision. Yeah, it was debated and basically concluded that it was not something you should do. If you did it, you were trying to buy your way into heaven, and that was the wrong way to do it. There have always been people like Jesus. There are spiritual teachers, masters, gurus. They exist in the world today. Yeah, and Ehrman does this thing where he will talk about other classical figures who had basically identical biographies to Jesus, who none of us have heard of. Jesus Nazareth Lex. Oh man, I don't speak Latin. Jesus the Nazarene, King of the Jews, which is apparently something that he did teach. Okay. What do you think would piss off leftists most? Abolishing the minimum wage or abolishing the Department of Education? Probably abolishing minimum wage, since that's something that they argued for first. So their priorities, you can kind of tell the earlier they implemented them, the more important they are. So the Department of Education didn't come until 1970 or even later, maybe like 77. And the department and minimum wage goes back way before. So minimum wage probably. Uh, have you ever read the book or seen the film The Last Temptation of Christ? No. Forged by Ehrman pretty much made me an atheist. Yeah, he debates a mythicist. I don't remember if it's Richard Carrier. I watched it not that long ago. It was a good debate, but I thought that Ehrman won the debate. Uh, the propaganda is that the parties have moved right. That is a laugh. Even misquoted Dole campaign out, get rid of Dole, blah, blah. Let's see. There's some nuance there. I've read libertarians argue Jesus was an anarcho-capitalist. I've also read those. Basically, the gist of it was at no point does Jesus command you to form a state, and that he was executed by a government. Uh, in fact, right now, because of the crackdown on like Easter services, you're seeing a lot of memes along those lines. I think that is a case, though, of them reading into it. So, because a lot of socialists read the Bible too and think that it confirms what they believe. His original teachings are that he should be the king, that he should be the king of Israel. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Robert Price. That's the one that I saw. Da-da-da. Yeah, I wasn't impressed by Price, and I had actually remember I had watched Price 10 years ago, where it wasn't really a debate; he was getting interviewed, and I found it more convincing. When I watched him debate Ehrman, I thought Ehrman really won that debate. Have you ever read any of Keynesian's economic books just to understand alternative perspectives? So I've thought about reading I did read uh, the Failure of the New Economics by Hazlitt, which quotes it extensively, but it's not the same thing as reading it. So I probably should read the general theory, but I haven't. Um, what is your opinion on Satan as well as Satanism in general? I'm against. Pentazoid, when are we having my Toronto meetup in your showers at your college? Some Jews thought he was the promised Messiah, yet they became his disciples and then converted to Christianity after he was killed. How goes your foreskin? I'm wearing my device right now. Slow but steady. Keep on tugging. All right, guys, it's 2 hours. So let's wrap it up here. I want to go to bed in a bit. And Pentazoid, you guys didn't answer. What percentage of the people in the communal showers have foreskins? We're looking at 50%, 20, 30. Have you ever read the Satanic Bible? No. But I've hooked up with Levian social Satanists before. "70% are uncircumcised?" Okay, you need to give me the address of this place. Thank you, Taurus Dream. Happy Easter. In Ontario, though, I always thought Ontario had relatively high circumcision rates, but it probably depends on how old someone is. When I was in Montana, I talked to a nurse in Saskatchewan who, obviously being gay, who hooked up a lot, but also being a nurse, he saw a lot of dick. And he said that you could tell what year Saskatchewan took circumcision off the recommended medical list because it was literally guys who were 26 and younger would be uncircumcised, and guys who were 27 and older would be circumcised. Just Google Heart House Toronto. Awesome. On my next vacation. Oh my goodness. Heart House Toronto. That's a gym associated with the University of Toronto or something separate? There are news articles about circumcision despite effective medical bans. Very frustrating. What do you mean by that? News articles about what? In Austin, I've seen anti-circumcision signs. Good. I think it's definitely it's definitely becoming more and more of a thing. Thanks to the American circumcision, thanks to the bloodstained men, thanks to your whole baby. There's just been a lot of intactivism. Are you a Christian? No. But I'm not anti-Christian either. Mad respect for the Christians in general. Have you ever heard of someone circumcised twice, wondering how sexual sensation would change? Not credibly. I have seen people post stuff that was suspicious and just how outlandish it was. So I remember somewhere seeing somebody say something along the lines of, they got circumcised and then they restored, and it was so awful that they got circumcised again. But I find that so unlikely, and the way that it was thrown out there, it struck me as just pure propaganda, which is not to say it's impossible, but I wouldn't say that's a credible report of that happening. And that's the only time I've heard of it. And I've only seen it maybe once or twice, or somebody would say something like that. Um, Now, there are people who have botched circumcisions. They get circumcised as a baby, and it's not very good, and they have to go back for touch-up procedures. And we actually don't. This is actually apparently fairly common, but we don't know how common. Which was interesting too, because when the AAP redid their recommendation in 2012, which by the way, it's been 8 years. That recommendation should obviously be redone anyway, but it should definitely change. But it was interesting in that report. They said that the risks of circumcision were not known. So they did not know the rate of complications. They didn't know the rate of people who regretted it. They didn't know the rate um, of the babies who died. They didn't, because they know that it does happen. They just don't know how much. Um, so they said we don't know what the risks of all that are. But then in their summation, they said, but the benefits outweigh the risks. Well, if you don't know what the risks are, how can you say that they're quantitatively, worth the benefits are greater if you don't know what the risks are? Uh, it's part of the university. The Queen visited there before, I think. It's a very old building with a gym, but also many other things like a theater, cafe. Sounds like a nice place. Oh, COVID-19 elective procedure bans. Yeah, I have read about like like religious circumcisions being banned because it's a ceremony that involves 10 people or whatever in like Israel. And I haven't read about that in the United States. I feel like it would apply to the United States though. It it seems like it should be. It is a if they're going to ban elective procedures, then it's an elective procedure. AAP recommendation expired after 5 years. Did they ever do another one? That means they should have done another one in 2017, and I've never heard of it. There is evidence that that was a highly politicized move because the recommendations had slowly making it less, like it didn't matter, and then the Edgar Schoen and a couple of the other guys who were on there seemed like they were very hardcore circumfetishists. Edgar Schoen in particular. I've Gregory Melchuk, if he's still on here, he was the one who was telling me the details on this, but people like Brian Morrison, who's probably the most outspoken, famous proponent of circumcision in the world, if you find a study, if you were ever thrown a study purporting to show that circumcision is better, or that an amalgamation of studies that show that circumcision is better, it's almost always produced by Brian Morris. And he really games the system to generate these studies, so-called. So for instance, like if a study is published that shows that foreskin is beneficial, he'll write a letter to the editor saying that he thinks that study's bogus. And he doesn't, have to make a good argument in the letter. But then a year later, he'll do an overview of the literature, and he'll ignore that study. And he'll say, well, I'm ignoring that study because that study was criticized. What he won't say is, why was it criticized? Well, he criticized it because he wrote a letter to the journal criticizing it. And so then he'll do an overview of the study, and he will say, my systematic overview of all the literature says that circumcision is better. And he doesn't tell you that he ignored all the pro foreskin stuff because he raised objections to it whenever it was published. And then any study that he's done, he just rates it as the best. So even if you had a study with only 3 people and it was clear selection bias, he'll be like, well, that pre-circumcision's better. So people like him and Edgar Schoen, who's now dead, are obviously huge proponents of circumcision. Edgar Schoen said that babies can't feel pain and that they're vegetables, which is clearly false at this point. But that they would watch basically circumcision porn, that they were members of a group, like a website that had members that circulated videos. In the old days, videotapes, like they would ship videotapes of each other, videos of circumcisions happening. And these weren't like, this is how you do it for medical school. These guys knew how to do it. Edgar Schoen knows how to do it, right? He's been doing it for however many years. These are like, it's just a fetish they have. There's something about it. They like watching it get done to babies for whatever reason. Now, not everyone in the AAP is probably like that. But there are other guys, I forget his name, but very famously, he said, when I circumcised my own son on our kitchen table, and I didn't do it for health reasons. I did it because I had 3,000 years of my ancestors looking over my shoulder. The fuck, dude? You should not be writing a recommendation for secular audiences about and saying that circumcision is better. You are obviously religiously, culturally biased to an extreme. And they can say, oh, I'm not biased. I just happen to be Jewish and think that this is a mandate that I have to do. Come on. Bill Gates funds mass circumcision in Africa. Yeah, with Epstein's money, apparently. I do want to say one thing, though. I was cruised by some older guys at my uni's locker room before. They were a little too forward for my liking. Has that ever happened to you in the shower? Well, I'd be curious to hear exactly what they did. I will say that, yes, that has happened to me. It is very rare, but it has happened to me. Uh, like, there are, I mean, there's a lot of guys I see, well, not now, obviously, but before COVID-19, there are a lot of guys um, who I see naked all the time, and they are clearly 100% mundane about it, and nobody looks, and they look, they see you, they know, but they are not staring. But there were two guys who were older, looked to be in their 60s or 70s, who they looked. I mean, they would stare. Um, and I didn't see them that often, but they would stare. I remember there was one who, the way the shower is, there's a communal shower, and then there's like a changing area, and then there's like a hallway. And when you go down the hallway, the door is glass, so you can see, which I always thought was interesting. And I was in the shower, and this, about 70-year-old man walked past the door, and then he walked backwards, back to the door, staring, and then he kept going. And I thought, I've got about 20 seconds, and he's going to be in here. And yes, now I was about done anyway, so I go and I'm drying off, and he comes in, and I'm drying off, and I can see in the mirror in the back, and he's just like staring. Um, Now, and I've had one or two other situations like that where a guy was just clearly staring. Another guy who I believe is a public school teacher, based on the shirts that he wears, same deal. So would stare, and once I was showering, and he came and took the shower head next to me, and just started jerking. He just started jerking off right there. Um, and I was like, "Come on, dude, seriously?" Um, So I will say well, I've been going there for 5 years. Um, that's not a lot, but yeah, that's happened. And then there was one guy who in the sauna would he would wear underwear, and he would like grab his crotch and like jerk through his underwear. But I mean, he would get a boner, and you could see that he had a boner. He was also kind of cross-eyed, so I don't know what his fucking deal was. And then the worst case was an older guy in his 60s who uh, I had talked to on Grindr, uh, and I'd known him for about a year, and we weren't friends. And I told him he's a little too old for me, and I'm not interested. Which he was okay. I understand. And after about a year, I was I went into the steam room, and he was in the steam room, and I'm like, whatever. It doesn't hurt me if an old man sees me naked, because I don't care. What, he's gonna go jerk off, and I'm gonna feel bad about it? Like, the fuck, grow up. So I went and sat down, and I closed my eyes, and I was sitting like this. And the steam room is really steamy. Like, you usually can't see, that far, and or not very well anyway. And as I'm sitting there, like a minute or two in, I hear squeak, squeak, squeak as he's stepping towards me, and I open my eyes, and there's a hand reaching for my cock. So I slapped his hand away and said, "What the fuck are you doing?" And he said, "Sorry," and he ran away. So, like, that was definitely the most overt thing that happened. The other guys only looked, they would stare, they never tried anything. Um, so it's rare, but it does happen. And I just say, if someone crosses the line, you tell them to step back, and they'll never do it again. I once read foreskin was sold to cosmetic companies. That's true. It not always is, but sometimes is. It's very valuable. Yeah, they're worth a lot of money. Neither parents nor the boy get to see any of the proceeds. When the parents sign consent forms, they sign such right away. Yeah, also, there's a serious legal problem with that, because they don't know if their doctors are selling the foreskins, and the doctors are also encouraging them to get it done, but they don't reveal that, then that's like an ulterior motive. There's some legal concept where if they don't know that, it's not informed consent, and so they can't actually agree to that. So there are lawyers who are working on that shit, but that's an uphill battle. Do you think stupid people have undue influence in society? Yes, it's called democracy. Uh, The old dude was stroking himself and staring at me like minutes until I left the showers. Yeah, so I saw that once, and I would just say, "Hey man, chill out." I had this conversation with a straight friend of mine, who became my sauna buddy. Who um, he was very straight. I mean, he's married now. He was engaged at the time. Very cute younger guy. I think he was 21 when I first met him, and we became shower sauna buddies. And he had no idea that I was gay. And one day he started saying that this quote faggot was following him around. And he described the guy to me, and I knew who he was talking about. And he wasn't an older guy. The guy was maybe 27, 28. And he's like, man, this guy was following me around. Like everywhere I went, he would follow me. And well, first of all, we're sitting in the sauna, and he's like, dude, there's a faggot in this gym. And I was like, oh, really? There's a faggot at this gym? This is before he knew I was gay. And he told me this guy was following him around. And I said, okay. I didn't know how to play it. I didn't like, well, actually, that's Josh, and I know Josh, and yeah, he is gay, and he's a little bit too forward. But I said, look, this is a gym. There's lots of guys who go here. Some of them are going to be gay, and they're going to see you naked if you walk around naked. And if you're not okay with that, then you should. I mean, the only way to avoid that is to just not get naked ever, because there's no guarantee that somebody there isn't gay and isn't going to see you. Or to be as sexually unattractive as possible, and then maybe they won't care. But I mean, who wants to do that? So I said, if you think someone's crossing the line and they're making you uncomfortable, then what you should do is confront them and just say, back off. And that's going to do it. And if it doesn't, if they continue, then you can talk to management and say, hey, we've got a problem. And he goes, that's exactly what happened. He talked to the guy the next day when it happened again, and the guy backed off. That's the very reason I don't like using communal showers. Okay, Glenn, I understand that, but I don't know that it's that common. Yeah, it's rare though. Most guys are respectful. If guys are being creepy, tell them you're not interested. Yeah, I've heard horror stories of certain places where this is more common, but they seem anecdotally to be rare. I don't think this is a big problem most places, and I also think, look, I get it. I mean, even though I'm gay, I'm not attracted to, a 70-year-old man who's looking at me. I'm not attracted to that. And I understand like being eye fucked by somebody you're not into. And you can just tell them to back off, if it's too forward, grow up. Holy shit. Like, Jesus, what the fuck are you doing? That's what when the guy tried to grab my dick, I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Um, I never, like, if you're an adult, you should never feel threatened, right? Because they're not going to be able to molest you like you're a little kid or anything. So, um, I think that fear is real. Look, I just related stories, but that was every time it ever happened, and in years and years and years, and going every day or multiple times a day, that's not a lot to go on. So I don't think it's that common of a problem, but I guess certain areas it could be more common. Richard Wilson's. Yeah, so Richard, I agree that it's rare, and you have to have that in context. Like, you could go to the beach and somebody could stare at you at the beach. Would that mean you'll never go to the beach again? When Gil Bates, who's Gil Bates, comes out with a vaccine, are you going to apply for your immunity identification card? Yeah, no, that's not happening. Random question, but are you not just attracted to Europe? What do you mean not attracted to Europe? Like European guys or Europe the continent? If you're tired, you should just go to bed. Lengthyounarther, get your beauty sleep, you cutie. Oh, well, hello, Richard Wilson. My phone number is. So, Richard Wilson, you're gay and you have been hit on by older men at the gym. When I early started this YouTube channel back in the day, 9 years ago, I did kind of hope that it would allow me to meet guys, and that has not happened. There are so few gay guys who watch this channel. It's ridiculous. Europe, the continent. You said you only went twice. Yeah, and one of the times was just to Iceland. Um, I like Europe as a continent. I just haven't had that many opportunities to go. So, Richard Wilson, do you think that you being gay makes you more or less likely to use the communal showers? And Pentazoid, does it feel weird that Richard might have seen you naked? I would imagine that most guys are surprised to find out you're gay. What do you think about that? I would imagine most guys are surprised. Why do you think most guys are surprised, Tortoise? I mean, you know that I'm gay. You knew I was gay before we ever met. You don't have the cartoon gay demeanor. Yeah, so I don't, and I most people don't think that I'm gay. Only once or twice have I met people who I think could tell right away, and they had amazing gaydar. So, yeah, that's just how it is. I don't. This is how I talk. I don't affect this. I do wonder about the gays who do take on the lisp and the the mannerisms because I knew a guy in college who was straight and acted straight, and then when he came out, he acted flamboyant and got a lisp. And I was like, did he was he suppressing that and then he let it out, or did he invent that after? And I actually honestly don't know. Uh, so I suppress it a lot. Like I don't have a lisp, but there's definitely things that I would say that I when you're with gay dudes and you're in a gay setting, there's things that you'll say and that you'll do that you would not do with non-gay dudes. Like it's much more explicit. It's much more thirsty. It's much more intimate, to be honest. Um, I could tell my brother was gay. Well, you were pretty close. Uh, he tried so hard to be straight. Yeah, it doesn't work. Many guys wrestled with that for a long time. I don't know. For me, it might have been that I just didn't do anything until I was older, and so like I'd already kind of established an identity. There are people here from Toronto. Apparently, there's a lot of people from Toronto, and apparently there's some nice communal showers in Toronto. What's with all the Canadians with communal showers? We had Calgary communal showers and Toronto communal showers on here. Okay, wait. So Richard Wilson answered yes. So you think the fact that you're gay makes you like the communal showers more? Do you find them to be erotic? Are you going there to cruise? Or are you just going there to shower and like for platonic hygienic reasons? Do, 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 do. I think most gay guys also like quote unquote straight acting guys. Most gay guys like masculine features. And so it is interesting that so many gay guys do act feminine, do dress feminine, act flamboyant, act that way, but then don't crave that, which think is interesting. You mentioned one of your videos that if you wanted to have kids, hypothetically, you'd have to sleep with a woman. Would you have kids? Yes, I would. I will admit, at first, I was using them to check out hot guys. And how did that develop from there? it's erotic for me. Um, there's definitely there's an undeniable erotic element, but there's also a mundane platonic element that, and depending on what's going on, they can be like on the daily at my gym, it's like 95% platonic and only 5% erotic, if that. That can change, if the hockey team shows up, but that doesn't happen that often. Don't have the cartoon gay demeanor. When did you come out? Well, like I never had an official coming out. I just started living more openly. So like my family, some of them know, some of them don't. And the ones who don't know should suspect by now, to be honest. I wouldn't know if you were gay unless you didn't tell me you're too masculine and not a raging leftist. I was very sheltered in high school. And when I first went to university and saw these hot guys, my body just reacted, but eventually I got used. So, Richard, earlier there was a question, a guy was worried that he would get boners. In your experience, would you think that that's not a big fear, not a big fear? That's something that he shouldn't worry about? Because in my experience, that's not a big problem. But I will also say I don't have a ton of experience with younger guys. I haven't been to a ton of college gyms. Well, I've been to some, but like I don't go to them regularly. So maybe it's more of a problem with guys who are younger. But as far as I can tell, it's not a big problem. Were you pressured to act straight during your teen years? Um, no, I wouldn't say pressured, but I think what does happen is that gay guys learn very early to self-censor and to n- not so much to suppress the feelings. So like I never felt guilty about my feelings. I always was attracted to men. I always knew I was attracted to men, and I never, because I didn't have a strong religious indoctrination. Not that all religious is anti-gay, but some of it is. I didn't feel like, oh my God, I'm going to hell or that this is evil. It was just the way that I was. But what I did know was that most other guys didn't feel that way. So I knew that when I looked at my friends in school, that I was sexually attracted to them. But I also knew, from what I could tell from inference, that they did not think the same thing. That whatever their boy thoughts were, they weren't about sexual attraction to each other. And there's two things that go with that. One is that you get a higher social acuity. You become much better at reading other people and gauging whether they can tell you're gay or not and whether they're gay or not. So that's just something that they've done studies on this, that gay men do tend to have a higher acuity for that sort of thing. And then the other thing is you do learn to self-censor yourself all the time. With me, there was never guilt associated with, of course, people will argue, and not without some cause, that if you're self-censoring yourself, then that is guilty. Something that's going to make you feel guilty or shameful. There's a lot of um, writing and thought that gays struggle with shame. There's a really good book called The Velvet Rage that basically covers this. Um, but um, you just know not to say, I want to suck Billy's dick. I want to see him naked. I want to, have sex with him. I want to get, these were thoughts that I would have, but I would know you can't say them. Um, Now I didn't get big into faking non-thoughts, so I didn't go around saying, I think she's hot. She's a pretty girl. Right. So I didn't try and compensate like that. I didn't try and pretend. I just tried to hide what I didn't want to share. Uh, but is that pressure? To get back to the question, is that pressure? The good question. People weren't going to me saying, act more mask. Why are you such a fag? That never happened. Nobody called me gay. No one made fun of me. Nobody questioned my sexuality. It was never, none of my friends, none of my family, nobody questioned my sexuality at any point, uh, ever, as far as I can remember. And I also, like, even when I was very young, I knew not to say what I was thinking. Where can I find communal showers? Gyms, schools, pools, YMCA's. Really depends on the demographic. Seeing a guy in his 70s naked is one thing, but when literally the hottest jock in the senior high school is soaping and naked besides you, it's hard to ignore. Yeah, no, I agree with that. We've all been there, Richard. We've all been there. However, now I've matured and I admire by glances, but don't get aroused. Now the locker room is more of a place where I get naked and boost my self-esteem, to be honest. Yeah, that's definitely a thing. So you're not the hot jock who's got a great body is nice, but you're also looking at the old dude and being like, "Wow, I really appreciate that I'm not at that point yet," which is fair. I've been guilty for a long time. And guilty of what? Why not use IVF to have children and raise the children with your husband? I don't know. Why not? Probably it's more expensive that way. How are you coping without BJJ? You know, you've mentioned it being a big part of your life for the last year, 2 years actually. I've been doing body weight workouts. Well, first of all, I did 5 months without BJJ when I went to Montana. So I'm very used to like isolation and social distancing. I actually checked the county that I worked in Montana, has zero reported cases of coronavirus, and the CDC rates its chances of an epidemic are less than 10%, which is the lowest rating they can give, just because it's so unpopulated, right? There's no universities, there's no hospitals, there's no prisons. It's just this huge empty space. And so I'm actually very much used to social distancing, to the fact that what I'm doing now is very tame. When I was out there, I could never go to the gym, I could never go to BJJ, and I could never meet anyone. And like I am trying to social distance, but I can still meet people, and I still do. So like it's not the same. Um, Being straight, I could admire a male body in a platonic way. Can you admire a female body in a platonic way, or do you see no beauty in it, erotic or otherwise? So this is interesting, and there's a whole subtopic here. And if you read the Temple of Perfection and Gym Boys, those are both. Gym Boys is about gay gym culture, and the Temple of Perfection is about just gyms. And I did reviews of them, and the Temple of Perfection, um, that was a really good book. I wish it was a more deeply researched. The guy, I looked at the author who did it, and he wasn't a guy who was specifically interested in this. He was a successful author in the sense that he found topics that would be kind of popular and would quickly do like research on them and write books, which is fine. It would be nice to do a deeper study, but the point of that is there's been a very incestuous long-term interaction between homosexual sexual desires and aesthetics, and the aesthetics and the physical tastes of the general population. So if you look at like the first bodybuilder, Eugene Sandow, arguably one of the first, I think he was born in the 1860s. He was bisexual. And a lot of the early bodybuilders and the early like physique magazines, Men's Physique and I think Atlas Magazine and a couple others, these were published by homosexuals and they were largely distributed to homosexuals, but not everyone who worked in them was gay. So like you would have these really athletic proto bodybuilders in the 30s and 40s, especially in the late 40s after World War II, who were straight, but they knew that they were basically making a living posing for magazines that were mostly selling to gay men. And the thing is, straight men also would see them in the movies and would see pictures of them and then aspire to them. And so gay ideals about beauty have influenced very, very strongly. And so like the ideal body, and there isn't objectively an ideal body, but there is in the sense that, you know, this type of body appeals to a certain percentage of the population and this type of body appeals to a different percentage of the population. the body type with the widest appeal would be either the twink or the twunk. So a twink is lean, low body fat, no hair, like body hair. Twunk would be that, but built up more. So, they're very lean. They've got 10 to 12% body fat, but they've also got 20 to 30 pounds of lean mass. And so, kind of like the ideal twunk would be something like Zac Efron. So, like The Rock or an actual bodybuilder, that's too far. That's not ideal for most people. But like Zac Efron, and then a twink would be like more like, say, Brad Pitt in Fight Club, let's say. So, and that's not to say that those guys are gay, but just that those ideas. So those are two really good books: the Temple of Perfection and Gym Boys, which cover them in some detail. So I think it is possible to admire a female body in a platonic sense, and I can look at a girl and know if she's hot or not. But it has, like, for me, it has zero sexual appeal, like zero. Like I would rather fuck my pillow than a woman. I take care of myself and look the same for 20 years. A lot of older people don't take care of themselves. That's why they look really bad. Yep. You can age very well. You can age very well. And there's certain things that you can do better later than you can earlier. So, like, in terms of the absolute bulk, the hugest, strongest guys, that doesn't happen when you're 19 to 22. That happens in your mid 30s. So Arnold and a bunch of bodybuilders got paid to hang around gay parties in the day. Probably true. Yeah, Tom Holland would be a twink to a twunk. Uh, do you consider yourself a twunk? Absolutely not. I'm not lean enough, and I'm too hairy. And typically a twink or a twunk would be somebody who would be younger. When somebody gets to be in their late 20s or 30s and they identify as a twink or a twunk, it's a little questionable. And it's actually it's kind of sad, because it's very possible to be an attractive middle-aged man. You can be very attractive, you can be very sexy, and you can have plenty of sex. But you can't really be a twink when you're 35 or 45. You can be very lean, you can be masculine in that sense, but you can't really be a twink. And it is sad when you have guys who, when they're 18 to 24, are twinks and they're very cute, and they kind of have that identity, and then they age out of that identity. And one thing that's very true is, like, gay culture is very Peter Panish. It does focus on the youth a lot, and that's not to say, like, you can do fine as you get older if you work on your body and you develop a different thing. So, like, I feel like, as a middle-aged guy, which I'm definitely in the middle-aged category at this point, like, having chest hair, having a beard. These are things that make you mask. I like just doing them because I'm lazy, to be honest. I stopped shaving as soon as I had a job that allowed me to not shave. Um, but if you try and maintain that twink persona, it just does not age very well. I've seen people try and do it. It doesn't work. And so you have to reinvent yourself and become a daddy or become something. And one thing you can do is, if you are working on your body that whole time, you can graduate from twink to twunk to, beefy dad. And that's, I mean, the 45-year-old who's got a lot of mass and not a lot of fat is the one who has the most action. There's no question. And he's also the healthiest. I mean, that's the thing. And the probably two are probably not unrelated either. The fact that you are healthy is probably, and people are looking at the muscles and the low fat as proxies for your health. And to be honest, they're looking for proxies of your child rearing ability, which doesn't make a lot of sense for gay people, but there it is. Um, and yes, Tom Holland is fucking hot, and he's probably uncircumcised too. So, is it the same for lesbians or different? No idea and don't care. Do gay men masturbate like straight men? No, the big difference is between cut men and uncut men. Since I imagine gay men can get 3 times the sex compared. Well, sure. gay men can get more sex, but when they masturbate, it's the same technique. So you go from twunk to daddy to bear, basically, yeah. You don't look middle-aged, but then again, I consider middle-aged people to be 50s or 60s. So I'm 37. I I don't feel like I've aged pretty well. I don't think I look that old, and I feel fine. I'm healthier now than I was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But I think it would be delusional for me to pretend like I was in my 20s when I'm not. I haven't been in my 20s for a long time. It's crazy how little you've changed since starting your YouTube channel, working out, and teetotaling pays off. Yeah, don't do drugs, don't smoke, don't drink. It's not that hard. The other thing, I did have my face burn off halfway through that period, and that helped. And then getting in shape helped. I thought you were 28. Yeah, I was 28 10 years ago. I just turned 37. I just had a birthday a couple weeks ago. I'm 40 and stacked. It's not that hard to stay young. Yeah, a lot of gay guys freak out because there's so much premium pays on young guys, late teens, early 20s, and they then identify they're a boy. That's a big part. Call someone a boy. I've gotten in trouble for this. People are like, "You said boy, dude." They're 25-year-olds who want to be called boy. Like they get off on that because they became sexually active when they were younger than the people they were meeting, so they're a boy in their mind. And a couple things with me, I didn't really start doing anything until I was well. So anyway, a lot of guys like they really dread turning 30. I've seen people post stuff like when you're 30, no one will have sex with you, your life is over, you can't do it anymore. The completely horseshit. I didn't do anything until I was 30. Now that begs the question: maybe if I started meeting guys, if I had Grinder when I was 20, who knows? Maybe it would have been a lot more. But I can tell you, like when I was 20, I would have been fat and not had a beard, and I don't know. So I don't know. Like I don't have anything to compare it with, but I can say from 30 to 37, I get way more now than I did when I was 30. And part of that is I got in shape. Part of that is I grew a beard. Part of that is I partially restored a foreskin, I guess. And then a big part of it is just having the experience. Knowing how to, you got game. Do you know how to handle this? If you're just starting, you really don't know what you're doing, and like that's a big part of it. Having those social skills that can take time to develop. Certainly, some guys never do. But yeah, a lot of guys worry that when they turn 30, that's over, and it's like nah, it's not. It's not even close to over. You consider the Stonewall riots to be your heroes. So I've only read about them in detail once, and I might viscerally no, I don't. Now they did do a lot of good things, and they were being brutalized by the police, and it is good that they resisted. But that was a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not really into, like the Drake stuff, and so and I don't identify them because they were in lots of ways just like hard up leftists. So I can intellectually appreciate what they did and acknowledge its importance. But viscerally, my intuition is not to see them that way. Um, is a culture of promiscuous sex good or bad for society? So, um, I that is a question that really depends on making assumptions about values and whatnot. I will say that there's definitely costs, and if you're not prepared, if you're not prepared to pay them, if you want to do it, you should be free to do it, but you should be prepared to pay the cost. So I don't think that, for instance, gay men should have their prep paid for by taxpayers. If you want to be promiscuous and risk catching HIV, that's your life. But you should have to pay for your own prep, and you should have to pay for your shot when you get chlamydia, and you should have to, right? So these are all things that they should have to pay for and not be subsidized. I mean, you get to enjoy the sex, so you should have to pay for the medicine. Seems pretty obvious. Are you okay dating younger guys? I'm 25 and I think you're cute. I love dating younger guys. Where are you, Fire and Ice? Send pictures. Yeah, my brother didn't fool around with other men until their late 20s. So I'm interested because I never felt guilty, but then again, I didn't really do anything until 30. And I don't know, like, I always say that I was busy, which was true. I was busy. But I wasn't so busy that I couldn't possibly have done anything. And so I do wonder, like, was I in denial or what? Like, I don't have a good example. And in I'd say in total, I regret that I waited that long, but it wasn't all bad because it meant that, oh, you're in Tennessee. Okay, great. Are you circumcised or not? Um, I think monogamy leads to better outcomes socially and economically. Yeah, assuming monogamy is something that people really do. Hans Hermann Hoppe has said that gays have high time preference because they don't have children. He's very conservative about that socially, but all respect to Hop. I mean, but could you say that like someone like Peter Thiel doesn't have low time preference? Like he's an investor, and it's also possible. This is the thing he doesn't understand. Like you can be a hookup artist who's fucking left, right, and center, not having kids, but still buying. Like I know gay guys who are huge into real estate. Like I have a lot of gay friends who are they're very wealthy. Like I have a friend who's 27 and he owns like I think 13 or 14 houses, and he's not wealthy. He just house after house after house, and he's making real estate. He's becoming a fucking landlord guru, and he's gay as fuck, man. He sucks dick. He takes raw loads. That's what he lives for. But he also invests, and he knows how to handle his finances, and that's very common. So, what's that? Was it? I want to say it was not George Bernard Shaw, Oscar Wilde, who said, "Homosexuality exists so that the talented will not be burdened by children." And you do find that there is this within the gay community. It's complicated, but there are on the one hand you have a lot of shame and this is bad and homosexuality is it's not monogamous, it's costly, it causes plagues and blah blah blah. And then you have on the other hand, gays are smarter than ever other people, they're better looking than other people, they're more talented than other people. And so in the Gay Metropolis, the book that I read recently, one of the early guys that he interviewed, a guy named Otis Bigelow, who in the 40s was considered the sexiest man in New York. Um, he, he was gay and he wasn't into like out gay rights and let's be out and proud, but he saw himself as like an elite person. He was like, I've had sex with hundreds of people. I know how to do it. I know how to do it better than straight people will ever know, and I am smarter, more socially adept, more keen. This is somebody who, like, in his 20s would have been getting millionaires wrapped around his finger, like they're his slaves. So, what would that do to your head? So it's complicated. There are lots of married men that have sex out of marriage. Yes, there are. They message you on Grindr every day. I would guess Hop is saying it's Ceritus Paribus. Sure, fair enough. Ceritus Paribus is a questionable concept. Yes, it is. Yeah, so one thing people will say is like, homosexuality is degenerate because it doesn't have children. And so then you bring up, well, what about straight couples or single people who never have children? Like my next door neighbors growing up they were Catholic as a married man and woman, and they've been married. They're still married. They've been married for whatever 50 years, and they never had children. Right? They would have dogs, but they never had children. I don't know if they were infertile or if they made a choice, or I don't know, but they never did. So house in the suburbs, pay their taxes, go to church, No kids. So would someone say they're degenerate because they didn't have children? So I can see that, look, because children are wonderful and we need more children, so I can get it, but are you going to then accuse someone of being degenerate because they don't? H.L. Mencken also wrote the great essay about how great philosophers and thinkers stayed single their entire lives, partly in jest, but there is some truth to what he. Yeah. Well, if you don't have to raise children, you're free to do other things. Should people pay high fines and be shamed for getting divorces? I think there should be shame for getting divorces, and I think that we shouldn't have no fault divorce, and we shouldn't have this favoring of women in divorce. It should be marriage should be serious, and leaving marriage should be serious. Have you made a video about the pros and cons of Grindr? Not specifically. I've talked about it before, but not in a video dedicated to that. I did one about Grindr being woke but not specifically about like whether it's good or bad. Leads to better social outcomes because it reduces competition for women, more competition, i.e. I don't know, but see, if gay men reduces competition for women, right? If 5% of the men become gay, then there's less competition for women. But the birth rate won't be any different, presumably. The problem is with a polygamous society where you have multiple wives to one man. That's when you start to have big problems. Do you think that the introduction of gay men and gay couples with children will make the gay community as monogamous as the straights? No. 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 I know gay couples with children and they get train banged. So no. I know gay couples with children who hook up at the gym when their children are there in the showers. So no. Not communal though. Those were installs. Make that very clear. All right, guys. 3 hours, 12 minutes. This is going to have to be it. But thank you all for watching. Do you want to be in a monogamous marriage with kids one day? That would be a hard trade-off, but maybe. Anyway, guys, I'm going to call that good. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Have a happy Easter, and I will talk to you all later. Train banged. You know how a train has one car after another? Anyway.